Nero Wolfe and the Broken Timepiece. It was a Wednesday morning in October when the package arrived, and I was nursing my second cup of Fritz's coffee while working through the mail at my desk in the office. Outside the bulletproof windows, a modification Wolfe had insisted on after the Barstow affair 3 years back, West 35th Street was enjoying one of those crisp autumn days that make you forget New York has any season except beautiful. Wolfe wouldn't descend from the plant rooms for another 20 minutes, which gave me time to sort through the usual collection of appeals, advertisements and correspondence before he planted his seventh of a ton in the oversized chair behind his desk and started the day's battle against anything that might disturb his routine. Caesar, the largest of our 5 Dobermans, was lying near the hall doorway in his customary spot, black and tan head resting on his paws, but eyes alert and tracking my movements. The alpha of the pack didn't miss much. His brother Mars was somewhere in the front room, probably sprawled on the rug Fritz had given up trying to keep dog hair free. Apollo would be patrolling, that one never sat still for long. Minerva and Diana, the 2 females, preferred the kitchen where Fritz was preparing what smelled like brioche, and where Loyal, our brick-red pit bull, had established his favorite corner near the warmth of the range. The buzzer sounded. One short ring. The front door. Fritz emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, and moved through the hall with his usual efficiency. Through the one-way mirror Wolfe had installed in the office wall, also bulletproof, though Fritz claimed it made him feel like he was living in a bank vault. I watched our chef inspect the visitor through the glass panel beside the entrance. Caesar was already on his feet, silent but attentive. Mars joined him from the front room, the 2 Dobermans forming an impressive welcoming committee, or unwelcoming, depending on your perspective and their decision about you. Fritz opened the door, the regulation 4 inches the chain allowed. I heard voices but couldn't make out words. Then Fritz closed the door, removed the chain and opened it fully. A Western Union messenger, a kid maybe 20 with red hair and freckles, stood on the stoop holding a package about the size of a shoebox. The dog studied him with professional interest but didn't move. They'd seen delivery boys before and filed them under harmless until proven otherwise. "For Mr. Nero Wolfe," the kid said, his voice cracking slightly as Mars took a step closer and gave him the once-over. "Needs a signature." Fritz handled it, signed the clipboard, accepted the package, and sent the kid on his way with the door closed and locked before the messenger had reached the sidewalk. The dogs relaxed. Caesar returned to his post, Mars to his rug. Fritz brought the package to me. It came by special messenger, Archie, from the Western Union office on 8th Avenue, prepaid. I examined it. Brown paper wrapping, tied with string, addressed in neat block letters to Nero Wolfe, 918 West 35th Street, New York. No return address. The postmark was local, dated yesterday afternoon. It weighed maybe 2 pounds. "You want me to open it or wait for him?" I asked Fritz. He shrugged. "You are his confidential assistant. I am his chef. The decision is yours." Which meant he thought I should wait, but was too diplomatic to say so. I set the package on my desk and went back to the mail. Fritz returned to his brioche. Caesar yawned, showing teeth that could convince a burglar to find a new profession. At 11 o'clock precisely, I heard the elevator creak. Wolfe coming down from his morning session with the orchids. Theodore Horstman would be up there for another hour, fussing over the cattleyas and the phalaenopsis and the 10,000 other temperamental plants that occupied the 4th floor and a good portion of Wolfe's attention. The office door opened and Nero Wolfe entered. He was, as always, immaculate. Yellow shirt, brown tie, brown suit tailored to accommodate his bulk without surrendering dignity. His hair, still dark except for a little grey at the temples, was brushed back from his massive round face. He stopped one step inside the room, surveyed his domain with those half-closed eyes that missed nothing, nodded infinitesimally at Caesar, who thumped his tail twice in acknowledgement, and proceeded to his desk. The journey from door to chair required navigation around Diana, who had wandered in from the kitchen and sprawled in his path. She moved without being asked, anticipating his route with the timing of long practice. Wolfe eased into his chair, adjusted it slightly, and glanced at me. "Good morning, Archie. Anything?" "Good morning. Mail is the usual. 3 appeals from organizations that think you'll fund their crusades, 2 advertisements for services we don't need, and a letter from Mrs. Pemberton thanking you for finding her nephew's embezzler. Also a package arrived by messenger." I held it up. His eyes narrowed slightly. "From whom?" "No return address. Postmarked yesterday. Local. delivered by Western Union Messenger, about 20 minutes ago. Open it. I got out my pocket knife and cut the string, careful not to damage the wrapping more than necessary. Inside the brown paper was a cardboard box, the kind you might get from a jewelry store. I lifted the lid. Nestled in cotton batting was a pocket watch. Not just any pocket watch. This was the real thing, the kind they don't make anymore. Gold case, probably 18 carat, with an intricate engraved pattern of vines and flowers covering both sides. I lifted it carefully. The chain was there too, gold links with a fob in the shape of a tiny locomotive. The watch itself felt substantial, quality workmanship from an era when timepieces were investments, not disposable gadgets. I pressed the stem and the cover popped open. The face was white enamel with Roman numerals in black and elegant gold hands that weren't moving. The crystal was cracked, a spider web of fractures spreading from a central impact point. The hands were stopped at 10:47. Broken, I said, stating the obvious. Stopped at 10:47. The crystal is cracked like someone dropped it or hit it with something. Wolfe extended a hand. I carried the watch to his desk, along with the box and wrapping. He examined the watch with the careful attention he usually reserved for rare books or exceptional sources. His blunt fingers, surprisingly delicate when they chose to be, turned it over, opened the back casing, and studied the mechanism. Swiss, he said. Patek Philippe, circa 1885. Excellent condition except for the damage. The mainspring is broken, snapped, not unwound. The crystal was struck with significant force, enough to stop the watch instantly. He closed it and set it on his desk blotter. There was nothing else in the package. That's it. Just the watch. No note? No card? Nothing. He picked up the brown paper wrapping and examined it, then the box. His expression suggested he was less than delighted with this development. Someone sends me a broken watch anonymously, by paid messenger, and provides no explanation, no request, no indication of purpose. A puzzle without instructions. Maybe the watch is the message, I suggested. 10:47 could be a time that matters. Or the watch could belong to someone important. Speculation without data is worse than useless. It establishes false patterns. He pushed the watch away slightly, as if disassociating himself from it. I have no interest in anonymous enigmas. File it. File it where? Under mysterious timepieces, or things that make no sense. Your choice. But remove it from my desk. I returned to my own desk, tucked the watch back in its box, and was about to consign it to a drawer when the buzzer sounded again. 2 short rings this time. The front door. Someone insistent. Fritz appeared, checked the door, and I saw through the mirror, as he opened it, the regulation 4 inches. This time Caesar and Mars both rose, joined immediately by Apollo, who materialized from wherever he'd been prowling. The 3 Dobermans formed a semicircle behind Fritz, interested but not aggressive. Yet, the visitor was a woman, middle-aged, wearing a charcoal suit that meant business, and a hat that suggested money. Fritz hesitated, then glanced toward the office. I nodded. He removed the chain and admitted her. She stepped inside with the careful awareness of someone who notices 3 large Dobermans studying her with professional interest. To her credit, she didn't freeze or squeal. She simply stood still and let them make their assessment. Caesar stepped forward, sniffed her gloved hand, and stepped back. Verdict, probably harmless. The others relaxed. I'm here to see Mr. Nero Wolfe, she said. Her voice was controlled, educated, with a trace of something, not quite panic but close. My name is Helena Pembroke. I telephoned earlier this week but was told Mr. Wolfe doesn't accept appointments. That is correct, Fritz said. I sent him something by messenger this morning. A pocket watch. It belonged to my husband. She looked directly at Fritz, then passed him toward the office door. My husband was murdered 3 days ago, and that watch is the only thing that can prove who killed him. I need Mr. Wolfe's help. Well, that changed things. I stood and went to the door. Mrs. Pembroke, I'm Archie Goodwin, Mr. Wolfe's assistant. Would you come in, please? She followed me into the office. The dogs trailed along, curious now. Minerva and Diana joined the procession from the kitchen, and even Loyal trotted in, his notched ear giving him a rakish appearance that contrasted with his steady, intelligent eyes. 6 dogs and 2 men suddenly made the office feel crowded, but Mrs. Pembroke didn't seem to notice. Her attention was fixed on Nero Wolfe, who had not risen from his chair, he never did for anyone, but was regarding her with the expression he reserved for people who interrupted his routine with corpses. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "thank you for seeing me. I haven't agreed to see you. I agreed to let you enter my office, which is a different matter entirely. Please sit." She took the red leather chair. I returned to my desk, pulled out my notebook, and prepared to earn my salary. The dogs arranged themselves around the room, Caesar near Wolfe, Mars by the door, Apollo under the window, Minerva and Diana flanking my desk, and Loyal settling near the bookshelves with a view of everyone. "Your husband," Wolfe said. "Name?" "Julian Pembroke. He was a watchmaker and horologist, one of the finest in New York." "I am not familiar with the name." He preferred it that way. His clients came through word of mouth, collectors, museums, estates needing authentication or restoration of important timepieces. She glanced at the box on my desk, where the watch was still visible. That watch was in his workshop when he died. It's a Patek Philippe from 1885. He'd been hired to repair it. "By whom?" "A man named Hackett. Desmond Hackett. He's a private collector, very wealthy. He brought the watch to Julian 6 weeks ago." Wolfe's eyes had opened slightly more, his version of showing interest. "Your husband was murdered, you said. The police are involved." "The police think it was an accident." Her voice tightened. "They're wrong. Julian was found in his workshop on Sunday night. They say he fell, hit his head on his workbench, and died from the blow. But I know better. Julian was murdered, and that watch proves it." "How does a broken watch prove murder?" She leaned forward slightly, her gloved hands gripping her purse. "Because when Julian repaired valuable watches, he always documented everything. He photographed them, tested them, recorded the exact time they kept. He was meticulous, and that watch was working perfectly when he finished repairing it on Friday afternoon. I saw him test it myself. He set it, wound it, and it kept perfect time. And now it's broken," I said. "And now it's broken. Stopped at exactly 10:40. She looked at Wolfe. "Julian was found dead at approximately 11:15 Sunday night. The police say he died between 10:30 and 11. But if that watch was working Friday and is broken now, stopped at 10:47, it means someone was in that workshop during the time Julian died. Someone broke that watch, deliberately or accidentally, during a struggle, and that someone killed my husband." Wolfe was silent for a moment, studying her. Caesar shifted slightly, his eyes on the woman as if gauging her truthfulness with canine instinct. "You sent me this watch without explanation," Wolfe said. "Why?" "Because I'm afraid." Simple words, but the way she said them carried weight. "If I'm right, if Julian was murdered, then whoever killed him knows about that watch. I couldn't keep it in my possession. I couldn't go to the police with it. They've already closed the case as accidental death. I needed someone who could protect it, examine it, and use it to find the truth." She met his gaze. "Everyone who knows about rare timepieces knows about you, Mr. Wolfe. You solved the Barstow case. You found the truth about the Kensington rubies. I need you to find the truth about my husband's death." Wolfe closed his eyes. Bad sign. He was about to say no, to send her away, to refuse involvement in anything that required effort or disturbance to his schedule. I could see it coming. "Mrs. Pembroke," he said, eyes still closed, "your theory is interesting but not persuasive. A broken watch proves nothing except that the watch is broken. Sending it to me by anonymous messenger suggests melodrama, not methodology. I sympathize with your loss, but I cannot." "I'll pay you $20,000, she said. His eyes opened. $20,000? $20,000 if you prove my husband was murdered and identify who did it, plus expenses, plus your standard fee for whatever time you require. She opened her purse and extracted a checkbook. "I'll give you $5,000 as a retainer right now." Wolfe looked at the checkbook, then at the broken watch on my desk, then at Mrs. Helena Pembroke. I could almost hear the wheels turning. $20,000 would cover a lot of orchid catalogues, a lot of meals from Fritz, a lot of comfortable routine that didn't require leaving the brownstone. "Archie," he said finally, "get the details." Which meant we had a case. I flipped open my notebook, clicked my pen, and smiled at Mrs. Pembroke. Caesar thumped his tail once, as if agreeing with the decision. Even Loyal raised his head, watching with those intelligent eyes. "Let's start at the beginning," I said. "Tell us everything about your husband." His workshop, Desmond Hackett, and that watch. And don't leave anything out. Mr. Wolfe likes complete pictures. She nodded, settled back in the red leather chair, and began to talk. Outside, West 35th Street continued its Wednesday routine. Inside the brownstone, surrounded by bulletproof glass and vigilant dogs, Nero Wolfe had just agreed to solve a murder that officially didn't exist. It was going to be an interesting case. Mrs. Pembroke settled herself more comfortably in the red leather chair and removed her gloves with the deliberate movements of someone organizing her thoughts. Wolfe had rung for Fritz, who appeared with a tray bearing a bottle of beer, a glass, and for our guest a cup of tea that hadn't been requested but was exactly what she needed. Fritz knew his business. Caesar had moved closer to Mrs. Pembroke's chair, not threatening, just observing. She glanced down at him, and I saw something shift in her expression, a momentary softening. "Beautiful animal," she said. "Are they all Dobermans?" "5 Dobermans and 1 pit bull," I said. "Caesar there is the boss. He's deciding whether you're telling the truth." She looked at me sharply, then back at the dog. "And what's his verdict?" "He hasn't walked away, so you're doing all right." Wolfe poured beer, watching the foam with the concentration most men reserve for beautiful women. "Your husband's workshop," he said without looking up. "Describe it." Mrs. Pembroke sipped her tea. Julian rented space in a building on West 46th Street, between 5th and 6th. The whole floor about 1,200 square feet. He'd been there for 18 years. It was his sanctuary. Workbenches, tools, filing cabinets full of documentation, hundreds of reference books. He had a vault for valuable pieces waiting for repair or authentication. Security. The building has a doorman until 6 o'clock. After that you need a key to enter. Julian's workshop had a separate lock. A good one, Robson. 2 windows facing the street, both barred. He was careful about security. His clients' timepieces were often worth more than most people's houses. Wolfe drank beer. Who had keys to this workshop? Julian, myself, and his assistant, Leonard Watts. She paused. Leonard found him. He came in Monday morning and discovered Julian lying on the floor near his primary workbench, dead. The police were summoned? Immediately. They examined the scene, questioned Leonard and me, spoke to Julian's clients. The detective in charge, a Lieutenant Brody, concluded that Julian had been working late Sunday night, stood up from his bench, became dizzy or tripped, fell backward, and struck his head on the corner of the bench. There was blood, a wound consistent with the fall. The coroner confirmed head trauma as the cause of death. What time did your husband typically work on Sunday evenings? He didn't. Mrs. Pembroke's voice was firm. That's one of many things wrong with the police theory. Julian observed a strict schedule. Monday through Friday, 9 to 6. Saturday mornings only, 9 to 1. Never Sundays. He reserved Sundays for me, for reading, for attending concerts. In 23 years of marriage, he violated that routine perhaps 3 times, and only for emergencies. I made a note. Wolfe was watching her with those half-closed eyes that saw everything. Yet he was in his workshop Sunday night. Wolfe said, "Why?" Someone must have asked him to come. Someone he trusted enough to break his routine. She set down her teacup. That's why I believe he was murdered. Julian wouldn't have been there unless someone convinced him it was urgent. Did he receive telephone calls Sunday? I was out Sunday evening, a concert at Carnegie Hall with my sister. I left at 6:30 and returned at 11:15. The phone may have rung while I was gone. Wolfe grunted. This assistant, Leonard Watts. Tell me about him. Leonard is 38, unmarried, competent but not brilliant. He's worked for Julian for 12 years. He handles routine repairs, keeps the files, manages appointments. Julian trusted him with everything except the most delicate restorations. Could he have repaired that Patek Philippe? Mrs. Pembroke considered. Technically, perhaps, but Julian would never have allowed it. That watch was too valuable, too important to Hackett. Julian handled it personally from the moment Hackett brought it in. What was wrong with the watch originally? The mainspring was worn, and the escapement needed adjustment. Julian ordered a replacement spring from Switzerland. He had contacts there who could fabricate parts for vintage pieces. The work took several weeks. Wolfe finished his beer and looked at the empty glass with regret. This Desmond Hackett, describe him. Wealthy, early 50s, divorced. He made his fortune in textiles, importing silk, Mostly. Now he's retired and collects watches and clocks. He has a penthouse on Park Avenue filled with them. Hundreds, possibly thousands. Julian authenticated pieces for him, handled repairs, advised him on acquisitions. How did Hackett react to your husband's death? He attended the funeral, expressed condolences, offered to help with any arrangements. She hesitated. He seemed genuinely shocked. But you suspect him? I suspect everyone who had reason to be in that workshop Sunday night. And Hackett's watch, that specific watch, is now broken. Stopped at the moment. Julian died. That's not coincidence, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe pushed his glass aside and folded his hands over his middle belly. Who else had reason to visit your husband's workshop? Who were his other current clients? Mrs. Pembroke opened her purse and extracted a folded paper. I wrote down the names of everyone Julian was working for at the time of his death. There were 6 active projects. I went to her chair and took the list, then carried it to Wolfe. He unfolded it and read aloud. Desmond Hackett, Patek Philippe pocket watch. 8 repairs completed October 10th. Claudia Thornhill collection of 4 Victorian pendant watches. Authentication in progress. Walter Spence regulator clock, circa 8. Restoration scheduled. Benjamin Rourke, chronometer set. Maritime, requiring calibration. Rutherford Museum, consulting on acquisition of 18th century bracket clock. Gerard Fleming, multiple pieces, ongoing relationship. Wolfe looked up at Mrs. Pembroke. 6 clients, 6 potential motives, or 6 potential witnesses. Which do you consider most suspicious? Hackett, because his watch is the one that's broken. And Fleming, because she stopped, choosing words carefully. Gerard Fleming is a dealer. He buys and sells rare timepieces, often at auction. He and Julian had a complicated relationship. They did business together, but Julian didn't quite trust him. He thought Fleming occasionally misrepresented pieces to buyers, exaggerated provenance, that sort of thing. Did your husband have proof of this? Not proof, suspicions. But Julian was meticulous about documentation. If he suspected a piece Fleming brought him wasn't authentic, or had been altered, he would have said so in his written report. Wolfe was silent for a moment. Mars had wandered over to sniff at Mrs. Pembroke's shoes. High-quality leather, I noticed, probably custom-made. She held still and let him complete his inspection. He moved away, satisfied. The watch, Wolfe said. When did you remove it from your husband's workshop? Yesterday afternoon. I went there to collect Julian's personal effects. The police had released the space. The watch was in the vault, in its case. Leonard said it had been there since Friday, when Julian completed the repairs. I took it without telling him where I was sending it. Does Leonard know you suspect murder? No. I've told no one except you. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Wolfe, someone killed my husband and made it look like an accident. That someone may believe they got away with it. But that watch is evidence. The police wouldn't listen to me, but I'm hoping you will. Wolfe closed his eyes and sat motionless for so long. I thought he might have dozed off. Mrs. Pembroke glanced at me, uncertain. I shook my head slightly. She should wait. This was Wolfe thinking, and interrupting his thought process was like stopping a train mid-journey. You'd get nowhere and annoy the conductor. Finally, he opened his eyes. I'll need to examine your husband's workshop. Archie will accompany you there this afternoon. I'll also need to speak with Leonard Watts, and with each of the clients on that list, you'll provide addresses and telephone numbers. Of course. One more question. Your husband's will. Who inherits his business? Mrs. Pembroke didn't flinch. I do. The workshop, the tools, the client list, everything. Julian had no other family. We had no children. What will you do with it? Sell it. Probably. To Leonard, if he wants it. Or close it down entirely. Her voice wavered slightly. I can't operate a watchmaker's business. I don't have the skills. And the value of this inheritance? The workshop itself? Perhaps 20,000 in equipment and inventory. The real value is in the client relationships, the reputation Julian built. That's harder to quantify. 20,000, Wolfe repeated. The same amount you're offering me to prove murder. Ironic. She met his gaze steadily. The money from the business will take months to liquidate, if it can be sold at all. The insurance settlement from Julian's death is immediate. $100,000, but only if his death was accidental. If it's proven to be murder, the insurance company will fight me for years. So you see, Mr. Wolfe, I'm betting against my own financial interest by hiring you. If you prove murder, I lose the insurance money and gain nothing but justice. Does that answer your question about my motives?" Wolfe's expression didn't change, but I saw the slight nod. She'd impressed him. It took something special to impress Wolfe, and Helena Pembroke had just managed it. "Very well," he said. "Archie, get the retainer and the contact information. Then take Mrs. Pembroke to her husband's workshop and examine it thoroughly. I want photographs if possible, detailed notes, and interviews with anyone who might have seen or heard anything Sunday night. Also, bring me that watch, the one from the vault." "It's the same watch I sent you this morning," Mrs. Pembroke said. "No, you sent me a broken Patek Philippe. I want the documentation your husband made when he repaired it. Photographs, test records, notes. Those should still be in his files." She nodded slowly. Of course, Julian would have kept everything. I pulled out the standard contract form from my desk drawer and filled in the relevant details, while Mrs. Pembroke wrote out a check for $5,000. She also provided a list of addresses and telephone numbers for everyone on Julian's client list, plus Leonard Watts and the workshop location. When she'd signed the contract, and I'd tucked the check in the safe, she stood to leave. All 6 dogs rose with her, a simultaneous movement that would have been choreographed if we'd trained them, but was just their natural pack behavior. They escorted her to the hall, Caesar and Mars in front, the others following. At the door, she paused and looked back at Wolfe. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Julian deserves justice." "Justice is an abstract concept, Mrs. Pembroke. I pursue facts. If the facts lead to justice, so be it. If they lead elsewhere, you'll have to make your peace with that." "I'll take facts," she said. "That's more than the police gave me." Fritz opened the door, checked the street, force of habit, and let her out. Through the bulletproof glass, I watched her descend the steps and head west toward 9th Avenue. The dogs returned to their various positions, their duty complete. Wolfe looked at me. Well, what? You want my impression?" "I want your assessment. You watched her throughout. You heard what I heard, and saw what I saw. What do you think?" I leaned back in my chair. "I think she believes her husband was murdered. Whether he actually was is a different question. But she's sincere, she's scared, and she's smart enough to know that hiring you might cost her $100,000 in insurance money. That takes either courage or desperation. Or guilt." I raised an eyebrow. "You think she killed him?" "I think she had opportunity, motive, and access. The insurance money is substantial. She inherits the business. She was conveniently absent Sunday evening." He waved a hand. "But those are obvious facts available to anyone, including the police. If Lieutenant Brody is competent, he's already considered and dismissed her as a suspect. Otherwise, he would have investigated more thoroughly. So we're not actually working for a murderer. We're working for someone who's paying us $20,000 to find the truth. Whether she's a murderer remains to be determined." He glanced at the clock on his desk. It was 11:47, 13 minutes before lunch. "Go to that workshop this afternoon. Take your camera, document everything. Talk to the assistant, the doorman, anyone who might have information. And Archie?" "Yes?" "Be careful. If Mrs. Pembroke is correct, and her husband was murdered, then the killer believes the crime is perfect. The police have closed the case. Discovery that we're investigating might prompt defensive action. You want me to take a guardian along?" I glanced at Caesar, who was watching our conversation with interest. "Not yet, but keep your eyes open and your instincts sharp. And if anyone follows you, lose them before returning here. I don't want trouble arriving at our door." Our bulletproof door, guarded by 6 dogs and 1 chef who could probably take down a mugger with a saucepan. Nevertheless, exercise prudence. I stood and retrieved my hat and coat from the rack near the door. I'll exercise prudence all over West 46th Street. Maybe I'll even exercise some lunch first. "Fritz is preparing Tunodo's Rossini. I suggest you partake before departing." Which was about as close to a paternal suggestion as Wolfe ever made. I wasn't about to refuse Tornado's Rossini, not when Fritz was cooking. Diana followed me toward the dining room, her tail waving gently. Loyal joined us from the kitchen, his notched ear giving him a perpetually curious expression. Behind me, I heard Wolfe push back from his desk and follow. The case had officially begun, and like all cases, it started with questions, led through complications, and would eventually, if we were lucky and smart, arrive at answers. Whether those answers would make Helena Pembroke happy was another matter entirely. But that was her problem. Ours was finding the truth, wherever it led. The building on West 46th Street was one of those pre-war structures that had probably been elegant once and was now just tired. 6 stories of brown brick, with a green awning over the entrance and a doorman's booth just inside the lobby. The doorman himself was a grey-haired character in his 60s, wearing a uniform that had seen better decades and an expression that suggested he'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. I showed him my identification. Archie Goodwin. I'm here about Julian Pembroke's workshop, 4th floor. He studied my ID with the careful attention of someone who took his job seriously, despite the worn uniform. You police? Private investigator, working for Mrs. Pembroke. She hire you to find out what happened to her husband. Something like that. Were you working Sunday night? Sunday I'm off. That's Artie's shift. Artie McManus. He's here weeknights, 6 to midnight. I do days, 7 to 6, except Sundays. So Artie was here when Pembroke died? That's what I heard. Police talked to him Monday. You want to talk to him? He'll be in tonight at 6. I filed that away for later. Who else works in this building? There's 8 units. 2nd floor is a tailor, Greco. Been here 30 years. 3rd floor, dentist's office, Dr. Hammerstein. 4th is Pembroke's place, was Pembroke's place. 5th floor, accountant named Arthur Berkowitz. 6th floor is divided. Photography studio on one side, music teacher on the other. Busy building on a Sunday night? He shrugged. Sundays are dead here. Most everyone's home with family. The photographer sometimes works late, fashion shoots and such, but I don't think he was here that Sunday. Artie would know. How do people get in after 6 when you're gone? Key to the front door. Every tenant gets 2. Then they need their own key for their office or studio. It's a secure building, Mr. Goodwin. We've never had a break-in. Not in the 12 years I've been here. I'm sure. Can I go up? He gestured toward the elevator. 4th floor. Door at the end of the hall on the right. It ain't locked. Mrs. Pembroke was here yesterday, and I guess she forgot to lock up after. I took the elevator, an ancient cage affair that creaked its way upward with the enthusiasm of an arthritic grandfather. The 4th floor hallway was dim, lit by 2 bulbs that could have used replacing around the time Dewey beat Truman. At the end of the hall, a frosted glass door bore the legend, Julian Pembroke, horologist, by appointment. I tried the knob, unlocked, as advertised. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The workshop was exactly what you'd expect from a meticulous craftsman who'd spent 2 decades perfecting his trade. 2 long workbenches ran along opposite walls, each with its own adjustable lamp, jeweler's loupe on a stand, and an array of tools so precise and specialized I couldn't have named half of them. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A safe, maybe 4 feet high, substantial, stood in the corner near the windows. Bookshelves sagged under the weight of reference volumes about watches, clocks, and timekeeping through the ages. And on the floor near the right-hand workbench, someone had died. The blood stain was still there, brown now instead of red, roughly 2 feet in diameter. The police had marked it with chalk, the outline of where Julian Pembroke had lain when Leonard Watts found him Monday morning. I set down my camera and notebook and started at the door, working systematically through the space. The 2 windows faced the street, both barred as Mrs. Pembroke had said, both locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. The safe was closed but not locked. I opened it carefully and found it empty, except for a few velvet-lined boxes and some documentation folders. The workbenches were organized with an almost obsessive precision. Every tool had its place, outlined in white paint on the wooden surface, so you could see exactly where it belonged. Most of the tools were in their spots. A few tweezers, a small screwdriver, a jeweler's loupe were out of place, sitting near the bloodstain as if someone had been working and had simply stopped mid-task. I photographed everything. The bloodstain, the workbenches, the tools, the safe, the windows, the door. I took close-ups of the area where Pembroke had fallen, trying to imagine what might have happened. If he'd been working at the bench, stood up and fallen backward, he would have struck the edge of the bench with considerable force. The wood showed a dark stain that might have been blood, about 3 feet off the ground. the right height for the corner to catch a falling man's skull. But something bothered me. If you're sitting at a workbench and you stand up, even if you're dizzy or having a heart attack, you don't usually fall straight backward like a toppling statue. You stumble, you grab for support, you twist as you go down. The body position the chalk outline suggested was too straight, too perpendicular to the bench. Unless someone had been standing behind him when he fell, or pushed him. I was examining the bloodstain more closely when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I straightened, my hand moving automatically toward the inside pocket where I keep my gun when I'm being prudent, which Wolfe had suggested I should be. The door opened, and a man stepped in. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with thinning brown hair, and the kind of face that looked perpetually worried. He wore a grey suit that needed pressing, and carried a leather briefcase that looked as old as the building. He stopped when he saw me. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I kept my hand near my pocket but didn't draw. "Archie Goodwin. I'm investigating Julian Pembroke's death. And you are?" "Leonard Watts." His expression shifted from suspicious to wary. "Julian's assistant, who hired you." "Mrs. Pembroke." "Helena? Why would she hire an investigator? The police said it was an accident." "Mrs. Pembroke has questions. I'm here to find answers." I gestured at the room. "You found him Monday morning." Watts set down his briefcase and moved into the workshop with the careful steps of someone entering a place that held bad memories. I came in at 9, like always. The door was unlocked, which was strange. Julian was always careful about locking up. I called out, thought maybe he'd come in early. Then I saw him. He pointed at the bloodstain. Right there, on the floor. I knew immediately he was dead. "What did you do?" "Called the police." Then called Helena. The police came, examined everything, asked me questions for 2 hours. What kind of questions? When I'd last seen Julian, whether he'd seemed upset or worried, whether anyone had threatened him, whether he'd mentioned working late Sunday. Watts moved to one of the workbenches and touched a tool gently, as if seeking comfort in familiar objects. I told them Julian never worked Sundays. They said maybe he'd made an exception. Maybe he'd had an emergency call from a client. "Did he tell you about any emergency calls?" "No. I saw him Friday afternoon before I left at 6. He was finishing the Patek Philippe for Hackett. He seemed fine, pleased with the work. Actually, he said he'd see me Monday morning." I made notes. "The workshop door was unlocked when you arrived Monday?" "Yes, but locked when Pembroke left Friday." "It must have been. Julian always locked up. Always. So either he unlocked it Sunday when he came in and forgot to lock it when he left." "He didn't leave," Watts interrupted. "He died here." "Right. Or someone else unlocked it. Someone with a key." Watts looked uncomfortable. "Only 3 people have keys. Julian, Helena, and me." "Where's your key?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key ring. 2 keys, 1 brass, 1 steel. Building entrance and workshop. I've had them for 12 years. Never lost them. Never had them copied. "Where were you Sunday night?" The uncomfortable look intensified. "Home. Alone. I live in a studio apartment on East 38th Street. "I don't have an alibi, if that's what you're asking." "It's what I'm asking." "I didn't kill Julian." His voice was firm. "He taught me everything I know about this trade. He trusted me. I respected him. I would never—" He stopped, visibly collecting himself. "Helena thinks it was murder, doesn't she? She has questions about the circumstances. So do I." I gestured at the workbench. "Walk me through what you think happened." "Pembroke comes in Sunday night." "Why?" Watts considered. Someone called him. Someone he trusted. Maybe a client with an emergency, a valuable piece damaged, something that couldn't wait. What kind of emergency would make a watchmaker break his Sunday routine? I don't know. Julian was devoted to his clients, but he was equally devoted to his schedule. It would take something extraordinary. Like what? Like a piece about to be sold at auction that needed immediate authentication, or a piece damaged in transit that needed emergency repair before insurance questions arose. Or, he stopped. Or someone he cared about asking for help. Watts met my eyes. Julian had a soft spot for people in trouble. If someone he knew, really knew, asked for help, he'd have come in, even on a Sunday. Who would fit that description? Helena, obviously. Me. Maybe Desmond Hackett. They'd worked together for years. Claudia Thornhill, possibly. She's been a client for a decade. He paused. Or Gerard Fleming. The dealer Mrs. Pembroke mentioned? Yes. They had history. Julian apprenticed with Fleming's father 30 years ago. There was affection there, even though Julian didn't entirely trust Gerard's business practices. I photographed Watts for my records, then pointed at the safe. What's usually in there? Client pieces waiting for repair or pickup, documentation, sometimes cash. Julian preferred cash payments when possible. It's empty now. Helena must have cleared it out yesterday when she took Julian's effects. Including the Patek Philippe? Watts nodded. It was in there Friday afternoon when Julian locked it up. I saw him put it in its case and place it in the safe. He said Hackett would pick it up Monday or Tuesday. Was anything else in the safe? Several pieces. Claudia Thornhill's pendant watches, Walter Spence's regulator clock parts, some of Benjamin Rourke's chronometers, all valuable. And they're all gone now? Helena would have them, or she returned them to the clients. I don't know. I haven't been here since Monday. I finished my photographs and pocketed my notebook. One more question. The Patek Philippe, when Pembroke repaired it, what did he do with his documentation? Watts moved to one of the filing cabinets and pulled open a drawer. His fingers walked through folders with practiced efficiency, then stopped. He pulled out a manila folder labeled Hackett, Patek, Philippe. Here, everything Julian documented about that watch. He handed it to me. Inside were photographs, 4 of them, 8 by 10, black and white. They showed the watch from multiple angles, exterior, interior mechanism, close-ups of the serial numbers and maker's marks. There was also a handwritten report in neat cursive. Patek Philippe pocket watch, circa 1885, 18K gold case, white enamel dial, Roman numerals, serial number 89374. Movement, Patek Philippe caliber, 15 jewels. Received September 3rd, 1952, from Desmond Hackett. Condition, mainspring worn, escapement misaligned. Repairs completed October 10th, 1952. Replacement mainspring fabricated and installed. Escapement adjusted. Timing tested over 72 hours, plus 2 seconds per day. Excellent. Watch returned to full functionality. Recommended service interval, 5 years. Beneath the report was a test log showing the watch's performance over 3 days. Every notation showed the watch keeping nearly perfect time. This is exactly what Mrs. Pembroke described, I said. The watch was working perfectly when he finished Friday. It was. I saw him test it. He was proud of the work. It's not easy to source authentic parts for an 1885 Patek Philippe. I tucked the folder under my arm. I'm taking this. Of course. Helena hired you. Watts moved back toward the door. His discomfort with the space obvious. Mr. Goodwin, if you find out what really happened to Julian, I'd appreciate knowing. He deserves better than having his death written off as clumsiness. I'll do what I can. One last thing. The police mentioned Lieutenant Brodie. Is he competent? He seemed thorough. He examined everything, asked good questions. But he was also clearly convinced from the start that it was an accident. I don't think he seriously considered murder. Why not? Because there was no obvious motive, no sign of struggle, nothing stolen, and because the circumstances, man falls, hits head, dies, seemed straightforward. Watts shrugged. Maybe he was right. Maybe I want it to be more complicated, because I can't accept that Julian died from simple bad luck. Or maybe Mrs. Pembroke is right, and the watch is the key. Maybe. He didn't sound convinced. I left him there in the workshop with his memories and his doubts, and took the elevator back down. The doorman was still at his post. I asked for Artie McManus's home telephone number, got it after some persuasion and a $5 bill, and headed back out into the October afternoon. West 46th Street was busy with the usual midtown traffic, businessmen heading to late lunches, secretaries running errands, delivery trucks double-parked and creating automotive chaos. I walked west toward 7th Avenue, thinking about locked doors and unlocked mysteries, about a broken watch and a dead watchmaker, about a widow who might be seeking justice or covering tracks. At the corner, I stopped at a payphone and dialed the number for Artie McManus. A woman answered, his wife, probably, and told me Artie was sleeping because he worked nights. I left a message asking him to call the brownstone later this evening. gave her the number, and hung up. Then I caught a cab back to West 35th Street, the folder full of photographs and documentation riding on my lap like evidence of something I couldn't quite name yet. But Wolfe would know what to make of it. He always did. I found Wolfe in the office with his head buried in a book, The Byzantine Empire by Charles Dell, from the look of the spine, and a tray of cookies on his desk that Fritz had probably delivered during my absence. Apollo was lying under the window, and Minerva had claimed the spot near the bookshelves. They both looked up when I entered, acknowledged my return with the barest tail movement, and went back to their rest. "Well," Wolfe said without looking up from his book. I dropped the folder on his desk. Julian Pembroke's documentation on the Patek Philippe, photographs, repair notes, timing tests, everything Mrs. Pembroke said it would be. The watch was keeping perfect time when he finished the work Friday afternoon. Wolfe set down his book, reluctantly, as always when interrupted during reading, and opened the folder. He studied the photographs with the intensity he usually reserved for rare orchids or unusual murders. His finger traced the handwritten notes. "Meticulous," he said finally. "This man knew his craft." His assistant confirms it. "Leonard Watts. I met him at the workshop." I gave Wolfe a complete report. The workshop layout, the bloodstain, the unlocked door, Watts's story about finding the body, the empty safe, and Watts's own lack of an alibi. Wolfe listened without interrupting, then said, "Your impression of Mr. Watts?" Genuinely shaken by Pembroke's death. Either he's innocent and mourning his mentor, or he's a good actor mourning his victim. He had means, a key to the workshop. He had opportunity, no alibi for Sunday night. Motive is less clear unless there's something about the business relationship we don't know yet. And the workshop itself? Secure, but not impenetrable. Someone with a key could have entered easily. Someone without a key would have needed to get past a locked building entrance and a locked workshop door, possible, but requiring effort and skill. The doorman saw nothing? Different doorman on Sundays. Artie McManus. I'm waiting for him to call back. Wolfe nodded and closed the folder. Very well. Now we speak with the clients. Starting with Desmond Hackett. It's his watch after all. I raised an eyebrow. You're going to see him in person. Don't be absurd. I'm going to have him come here. Telephone him. Tell him I have questions about the Patek Philippe and about Julian Pembroke's death. If he balks, mention that I'm working for Mrs. Pembroke and that cooperation would be appreciated. I got Hackett's number from the list Mrs. Pembroke had provided and dialed. A man answered on the third ring, cultured voice, no accent except the generic American of money and education. Desmond Hackett. Mr. Hackett, my name is Archie Goodwin. I'm calling on behalf of Nero Wolfe, the private investigator. We're looking into the death of Julian Pembroke and have some questions about a watch he repaired for you, a Patek Philippe from 18... Silence for a moment. Then, I heard about Julian's death. Terrible tragedy. But I'm not sure how I can help. Mr. Wolfe would like to speak with you. Could you come to his office this evening? Say, 6 o'clock? This evening? That's rather short notice. Mr. Wolfe prefers not to delay when he's investigating. It's at 908 West 35th Street. We'll expect you at 6 unless we hear otherwise. Another pause. Very well. 6 o'clock, I'll be there. I hung up and looked at Wolfe. He's coming. Didn't sound thrilled about it, but he's coming. Excellent. Now contact Claudia Thornhill. She can come at 6:30. I worked through the list. Claudia Thornhill, an older woman with a voice like expensive silk, agreed to 7 o'clock. Walter Spence, the regulator clock client, was unavailable until tomorrow. Benjamin Rourke said he'd come at 8 this evening. Gerard Fleming, the dealer Mrs. Pembroke had mentioned with suspicion, agreed to 8:30 with the air of someone who thought this was all very amusing. By the time I'd finished scheduling, it was approaching 4 o'clock, Wolfe's sacred orchid time. He hoisted himself from his chair and headed for the elevator without a word. I heard the mechanism creak as it carried him up to the plant rooms where Theodore was waiting with 10,000 temperamental beauties that demanded attention. I used the time to type up my notes from the workshop, make copies of the documentation, and organize the photographs into a coherent sequence. Fritz appeared with a tray bearing a pot of coffee and some sandwiches, his way of making sure I didn't expire from hunger before dinner. Diana followed him in and settled under my desk, her warm bulk against my feet like a living footstool. The telephone rang at 4:47. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. Archie Goodwin speaking. "This is Artie McManus. My wife said you called." "Mr. McManus, thanks for getting back to me. I'm investigating Julian Pembroke's death. You were working as doorman Sunday night when he died." "That's right. Hell of a thing. Nice guy, Mr. Pembroke. Never any trouble." "Did you see him enter the building Sunday night?" "I did. Around 10 o'clock. Maybe a few minutes after." Finally, something concrete. "Was he alone?" "Yeah, he was alone. Came in through the front door, gave me a little wave like he always did, took the elevator up." "Did he seem upset, worried, in a hurry?" "Seemed normal. Maybe a little surprised to be there. I mean, it was Sunday night, and he never worked Sundays, but he didn't act like anything was wrong." "Did anyone else enter the building around that time?" "Let me think." A pause. "There was the couple from the 3rd floor, the Hammersteins. They came back from dinner around 9:30, and the photography studio guy, Mr. Russo. He came in around 10:30 with some equipment. That's all I remember." "No one unfamiliar? No strangers?" "Nope, just tenants." "What about after Pembroke arrived? Did you hear anything? Any sounds from the 4th floor?" "Nah, you can't hear much from the lobby. The elevator makes noise, but once people are in their offices, it's quiet." "When did you leave for the night?" "Midnight, like always. I locked up, set the alarm for the cleaning crew, went home. And Pembroke's body was found Monday morning." "That's what I heard. I wasn't working Monday, my day off. But the police talked to me Tuesday, asked the same questions you're asking." "One more thing. Did Pembroke receive any phone calls Sunday evening? Messages, deliveries?" "Not that I know of. We don't take messages after 6 unless it's an emergency, and no deliveries on Sundays." I thanked him and hung up. So Pembroke had entered the building alone at 10 o'clock Sunday night, had been seen by the doorman, had taken the elevator to his workshop, and sometime in the next hour or so, he'd died. The question was, had he been alone when he died, or had someone joined him after the doorman saw him? I was mulling this over when Wolfe returned from his orchid session at 6 o'clock sharp. He settled into his chair, rang for beer, and looked at me expectantly. I gave him the report from Artie McManus. He listened, nodding occasionally, then said, "So Pembroke entered alone at 10 o'clock. The doorman saw no one else suspicious, yet Pembroke ended up dead by 11:30. Either he truly had an accident while working alone, or someone entered the building without the doorman noticing. Or someone was already in the building," I suggested. "One of the other tenants. The photographer maybe, or someone visiting a tenant."
"Possible. We'll need to investigate further, but first, he glanced at the clock. Mr. Hackett will arrive in 15 minutes. You'll take notes. I'll ask questions. Let's see what the man whose watch started this affair has to say."
The buzzer sounded at precisely 6 o'clock. Through the one-way mirror, I watched Fritz open the door to a man in his early 50s, wearing a cashmere overcoat, and the kind of confidence that comes from having more money than worries. Desmond Hackett was average height, trim, with iron grey hair and a face that suggested he'd been handsome once, and was still making it work. The dogs performed their usual inspection, Caesar and Mars doing the heavy work while the others observed from strategic positions. Hackett tolerated the scrutiny, with the air of someone accustomed to being evaluated. When the dog stepped back, satisfied, he followed Fritz into the office. Wolfe didn't rise. He never did. "Mr. Hackett, thank you for coming. Please sit." Hackett took the red leather chair, unbuttoning his coat, but not removing it. His eyes took in the office with the practiced assessment of someone who judged spaces and people quickly. "I'm here as requested, Mr. Wolfe, though I'm not sure what I can tell you about Julian's death that the police haven't already determined." "The police determined it was an accident. Mrs. Pembroke believes otherwise." "Helena hired you. Why?" "Because she has questions the police didn't answer. One of those questions involves the watch you brought to Mr. Pembroke for repair, a Patek Philippe from 1885. Hackett's expression didn't change. "Beautiful piece, part of my collection. What about it?" "When did you last see it?" "Friday afternoon, October 10th. I stopped by Julian's workshop to pick it up. He'd finished the repairs, and the watch was keeping perfect time. I paid him cash as he preferred, and took it home." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "You took it home? You have it now?" "I did have it. Until Monday. Explain. Hackett shifted in his chair. Caesar, who'd been lying near the desk, opened one eye and studied the man. Monday morning, I received a telephone call from Leonard Watts. He told me about Julian's death. I was shocked. Julian seemed perfectly healthy when I saw him Friday. Leonard asked if I'd be willing to allow Helena to borrow the Patek Philippe temporarily. Something about documentation, insurance, I'm not sure. I agreed. Helena came to my apartment Monday afternoon and picked it up. I stopped writing and looked at Wolfe. He was very still. Mrs. Pembroke picked up the watch from you Monday afternoon? Wolfe said carefully. Yes. She seemed quite upset. Understandably. She said she needed it for the insurance claim or estate documentation. I didn't press for details. She was grieving. I wanted to help. And you haven't seen the watch since? No. I assume she still has it. Wolfe and I exchanged a glance. Mrs. Pembroke had told us the watch was in the workshop safe when she went there Tuesday to collect Julian's effects. She'd said she took it from the safe and sent it to Wolfe Wednesday morning. But according to Hackett, she'd picked it up from his apartment Monday, a full day earlier, which meant either Hackett was lying about when Helena took the watch, or Helena was lying about where she found it. Or there were two watches. Wolfe recovered smoothly. Tell me about your relationship with Julian Pembroke. How long had you known him? 8 years. I started collecting watches seriously about a decade ago. A friend recommended Julian for authentication and repairs. He was brilliant, absolute expert in his field. I probably sent him 20 or 30 pieces over the years. Did you trust him? Completely. Julian was scrupulously honest. If a piece was fake or altered, he'd tell you. If it was genuine, he'd provide documentation that would stand up to any scrutiny. In the watch collecting world, Julian Pembroke's authentication was gold. Did he have enemies? Hackett considered. Not that I know of. Julian was quiet, professional. He didn't gossip, didn't play politics. He did his work and went home to Helena. What about his competitors? Other horologists who might have resented his success? There aren't that many top-tier watchmakers in New York, maybe a dozen. They all knew each other, referred clients to each other when appropriate. It's a small world. I never heard of any professional jealousy significant enough to cause violence. And Gerard Fleming, you know him? Hackett's expression tightened slightly. I know Gerard. He's a dealer, buys and sells at auction, has a shop on Madison Avenue. I've purchased pieces through him. But Gerard is, let's say he operates in the grey areas sometimes. Julian was meticulous about provenance and authenticity. Gerard is meticulous about profit margins. They work together when necessary, but there was tension. What kind of tension? The kind that comes when a dealer brings a piece to a watchmaker for authentication, and the watchmaker discovers it's not what the dealer claimed. Gerard had a piece authenticated by Julian about 2 years ago, a breguet from 1810 supposedly. Julian's analysis showed it was actually from 1850 with a forged signature. Gerard had already promised it to a client based on the earlier date. When Julian's authentication killed the sale, Gerard was unhappy. Unhappy enough to hold a grudge? Hackett shrugged. You'd have to ask Gerard. But I'll say this, in the watch world, reputation is everything. Julian's honesty protected the rest of us from frauds and mistakes. Losing him is a genuine loss to the collecting community. Wolfe nodded slowly. One final question. Where were you Sunday night? Home. Alone. Reading. Hackett met Wolfe's eyes steadily. I have no alibi, Mr. Wolfe, but I also had no reason to harm Julian. He'd just completed excellent work on one of my favorite pieces. Why would I want him dead? Why indeed, Wolfe murmured. Thank you for coming, Mr. Hackett. If we have further questions, we'll contact you. Hackett stood, buttoned his coat, and paused. If Helena believes Julian was murdered, I hope you find the truth. He deserves that much. But I think you'll discover the police were right. Sometimes accidents are just accidents. Fritz saw him out. Through the bulletproof window, I watched Hackett descend the steps and flag down a taxi, heading east. Mars followed him to the door, and then returned to his rug in the front room, duty complete. Wolfe looked at me. Well, we have a problem. Mrs. Pembroke told us she took the watch from the workshop safe Tuesday. Hackett says she picked it up from his apartment Monday. Someone's lying. Or both are telling the truth. And there are two watches. Two identical Patek Philippes from Unlikely but not impossible. Or one authentic and one fake. Or, he stopped, thinking. We need more information, but first we have more clients to interview. Let's see what Claudia Thornhill has to say. The buzzer sounded again at 6:58. Wolfe's clients, whatever else you could say about them, were punctual. Claudia Thornhill was the kind of woman who'd been born elegant and had spent 70 years perfecting it. She entered the office wearing a slate blue dress with pearls, her white hair swept up in a style that belonged to a more refined era, and carrying a small handbag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The dogs barely stirred. Caesar raised his head, assessed her, and returned to his rest. Even the pack recognized quality when they saw it. She settled into the red leather chair with the posture of someone who'd taken deportment lessons and never forgotten them. Mr. Wolfe, Mr. Goodwin, thank you for seeing me, though I confess I'm puzzled why you wished to speak with me about poor Julian. Wolfe inclined his head. You were his client, Mrs. Thornhill. You had business with him in the days before his death. We're gathering information. I see. Well, I'm happy to help if I can. Though I can't imagine what I might know that would be useful. She folded her hands in her lap. I've been collecting watches for 40 years since my late husband first gave me a pendant watch for our anniversary. Julian authenticated and maintained my collection. He was irreplaceable. Tell me about the pieces he was working on for you. 4 Victorian pendant watches. Exquisite pieces, really gold and enamel. One with seed pearls, another with tiny garnets. I purchased them at an estate sale in Boston 3 months ago. The seller assured me they were authentic, but I always have Julian verify before I add pieces to my collection. And his verdict? 3 were genuine, mid-1870s, excellent condition. The 4th was problematic. It appeared authentic from the exterior, but Julian found inconsistencies in the movement. He suspected the case was period correct, but the mechanism had been replaced, possibly in the 1920s. A clever forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. How did you react to this news? Mrs. Thornhill smiled slightly. With gratitude, Mr. Wolfe, Julian saved me from a costly mistake. I paid for 3 watches, not 4. The seller had to refund the difference. When did he tell you about this? 2 weeks ago. He'd been working on the authentication for about 6 weeks. These things take time, you understand. Proper examination of mechanical movements requires patience and expertise. Have you picked up the 3 authentic pieces? Not yet. Julian said they'd be ready this week. I was planning to collect them Friday. Her expression softened with sadness. Now I suppose I'll need to arrange pickup with Leonard. Wolfe nodded. Did Mr. Pembroke mention any concerns? Worries? Problems with other clients or projects? No. He seemed quite content when I last saw him. That was Friday morning. I stopped by his workshop to discuss the findings. He showed me the forgery's mechanism, explained what he'd discovered. He was passionate about his work, Mr. Wolfe. One could see it in how he described the craftsmanship, even when exposing a fraud. Where were you Sunday evening? She didn't flinch at the question. At home in my apartment on Sutton Place, I hosted a bridge game, 3 friends, started at 7 o'clock, finished around 11. Mrs. Aldrich, Mrs. Chen, and Mrs. Foster. They can confirm if necessary. That won't be needed at present. One more question. Do you know Gerard Fleming? The dealer? Yes, I know Gerard. He's sold me several pieces over the years. Competent but aggressive. He once tried to sell me a breguet that Julian later proved was questionable. I haven't purchased from Gerard since. Did Fleming know Julian had exposed his piece as problematic? Certainly. Julian provided me with written documentation. I shared it with Gerard when I demanded my money back. She smiled thinly. He was not pleased. After Mrs. Thornhill departed, escorted to the door by Fritz, while Diana followed along with her tail swaying, Wolfe sat in silence for several minutes. I knew better than to interrupt. He was arranging facts in that remarkable brain of his, sorting through what we'd learned, looking for patterns. Finally, he opened his eyes. Archie, we have a problem. We have several problems. Which one are you thinking about? The watch. If Hackett is telling the truth and Mrs. Pembroke picked it up Monday, why did she tell us she found it Tuesday in the workshop safe? Maybe she's confused about the day. Grief can do that. Helena Pembroke did not strike me as confused. She was precise, organized, and deliberate. She knew exactly what she was saying. Then Hackett's lying. Possibly. Or, he stopped as the buzzer sounded. 8 o'clock, Benjamin Rourke. Rourke was a different breed entirely from our previous visitors. He was maybe 45, weathered and solid, with the look of someone who'd spent time at sea. He wore a peacoat over a wool sweater, and carried himself with the rolling gait of a man accustomed to moving on unstable surfaces. The dogs were immediately interested, particularly Apollo and Diana, who approached him with tails up and noses working. He stood still and let them investigate, clearly familiar with canine protocols. "Mr. Rourke," Wolfe said, "please sit." Rourke took the chair and looked around the office with the frank curiosity of someone sizing up an unfamiliar harbor. "Nice place. Secure. I like the dogs. They serve their purpose. You were Julian Pembroke's client." "That's right. I run a marine salvage operation. We locate wrecks, recover cargo, occasionally salvage vessels that can be repaired. Proper navigation requires proper chronometers. Julian maintained my set, 6 matched pieces, essential for accurate position finding at sea. Maritime chronometers, Wolfe said. Expensive instruments. And temperamental. Salt air, moisture, temperature changes, they all affect performance. Julian recalibrated my set twice a year, kept them accurate to within seconds. Without precise chronometers, navigation becomes guesswork. Guesswork gets people killed. When did you last see Mr. Pembroke? 3 weeks ago. I brought in the chronometers for their fall calibration. He said he'd need about 6 weeks. 2 of the pieces required significant adjustment. Have you picked them up? They weren't ready yet. I was planning to collect them next month. Mr. Rourke, did Pembroke ever discuss other clients with you? Mention any problems or concerns? Rourke shook his head. Julian was professional. He talked about watches and timepieces, not people. That's what I liked about him. He kept things simple and did quality work. Where were you Sunday evening? On my boat. The Reliance, berthed at the 79th Street boat basin. I was doing maintenance, engine work mostly, alone. No alibi, if that's what you're asking. Did you have reason to want Julian Pembroke dead? Rourke met Wolfe's gaze directly. No. He was good at his job and fair with his prices. His death is inconvenient for me. Now I need to find another horologist who understands marine chronometers. That's not easy. After Rourke left with Mars escorting him to the door and watching through the bulletproof glass until he disappeared down the street, Wolfe drank beer and looked thoughtful. 3 clients, he said. 3 different relationships with the victim. 3 alibis ranging from solid to non-existent. And still the central question remains. What happened to that watch between Friday, when it was working, and Wednesday when it arrived here broken? Maybe Gerard Fleming can shed some light, I suggested. He's due in 20 minutes. Perhaps. But I suspect Mr. Fleming will be more interested in protecting himself than illuminating others. The buzzer sounded at 8:27. Early. Gerard Fleming was clearly eager to talk, or eager to control the narrative, or both. He swept into the office like a man accustomed to stages and audiences. Fleming was 50 or so, trim and energetic, with silver hair worn slightly longer than current fashion, and a suit that whispered expensive without shouting it. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd been charming his whole life, and intended to continue until death interfered. The dogs reacted differently to him than they had to the others. Caesar rose fully, watching with obvious intensity. Mars joined him, both Dobermans alert in a way that suggested wariness rather than welcome. Fleming noticed and stopped. "Impressive animals," he said. "Are they trained to attack on command?" "They're trained to assess threats," Wolfe replied. "Whether you constitute a threat remains to be determined. Please sit." Fleming took the chair but kept glancing at the dogs. "I heard you were investigating Julian's death. Surprised anyone's bothering? The police were quite clear it was an accident." "Mrs. Pembroke has questions." Helena. How is she? I sent flowers to the funeral but didn't attend. I assumed my presence might be awkward given the tension between Julian and myself." "What tension?" Fleming smiled. "Come now, Mr. Wolfe. I'm sure you've heard by now. Julian and I had what you might call a complicated professional relationship. I'm a dealer. I buy, I sell, I connect collectors with pieces they desire. Julian was a purist who believed every piece should come with ironclad provenance and absolute authenticity. Our philosophies didn't always align. You sold fraudulent pieces." I sold pieces based on the best information available at the time. Sometimes that information proved incomplete. Julian enjoyed exposing these inconsistencies. He leaned back in the chair, apparently relaxing despite the two large Dobermans who hadn't taken their eyes off him. But I respected his expertise, even when it cost me sales. Did you respect it enough to refrain from killing him? Fleming laughed, a genuine surprised laugh. Direct, aren't you? Yes, Mr. Wolfe, I respected it that much. Julian was occasionally inconvenient, but he was also useful. Dealers need authenticators. Without watchmakers like Julian providing documentation, the entire market collapses into chaos and fraud. Killing him would be like a butcher killing his last cow, short-sighted and stupid. Yet you had business disagreements. Several. The most recent was over a breguet I'd acquired from an estate in Philadelphia. I believed it to be from 1810. Julian's examination proved it was from 1850, with forged signatures and markings. The client, Claudia Thornhill, as I'm sure you know, demanded a refund. I provided it. It was expensive but not catastrophic. When did this occur? About 18 months ago. Ancient history in dealer terms. You bore no grudge? Mr. Wolfe, I've been in this business for 25 years. If I held grudges against every authenticator who cost me a sale, I'd have no energy left for actual business. Besides, he leaned forward slightly. Julian was right about that breguet. It was forged. I should have caught it myself. His expertise saved me from a worse fate, selling it to a major collector who'd have sued me into bankruptcy. Wolfe studied him. You were fond of him. I respected him. That's not the same as fondness, but it's more durable. Julian Pembroke was one of perhaps 3 watchmakers in America who could provide authentication that would stand up to international scrutiny. Losing him is bad for everyone in the trade. Where were you Sunday evening? At an auction viewing in Connecticut, Branford Estate sale. I drove up Saturday, stayed overnight at an inn, spent Sunday examining pieces for Monday's auction, returned to New York Monday evening. The inn staff can confirm, as can several other dealers who were present. What time did you return Monday? Around 7. I live on Madison Avenue, above my shop. I have an apartment there. Wolfe nodded slowly. One final question. Did Julian ever mention a Patek Philippe pocket watch he was repairing for Desmond Hackett? Fleming's expression flickered. Barely, but I caught it. The 1885 piece? Yes, he mentioned it. Beautiful watch, extremely valuable. Why? What did he tell you about it? Just that he was repairing it. Replacement mainspring. Timing adjustment. He was pleased with the work. Said it was one of the finest examples he'd handled. Fleming paused. Why are you asking about that specific piece? Because it may be relevant to his death. How could a repaired watch be relevant to an accidental fall? That, Wolfe said, is what we're determining. Thank you for coming, Mr. Fleming. Fleming stood, gave the dogs a final wary glance, and headed for the door. Fritz materialized to see him out. Caesar and Mars both relaxed once he'd left the brownstone, returning to their resting positions as if they'd just finished guard duty. I looked at Wolfe. The dogs didn't like him. The dogs are excellent judges of character. Mr. Fleming is charming, intelligent, and completely untrustworthy. You think he killed Pembroke? I think he's capable of it. Whether he did is another question. Wolfe closed his eyes. We have pieces, Archie, but they don't yet form a coherent picture. A watchmaker dies. His widow claims murder and produces a broken watch as evidence. But the watch's provenance is confused. Hackett says he gave it to Helena Monday. Helena says she found it in the workshop Tuesday. Meanwhile, we have multiple clients, each with varying degrees of motive and opportunity. Don't forget Leonard Watts, I added, the assistant with keys and no alibi. Indeed. We need more information. Tomorrow morning, you'll visit Helena Pembroke. Take the broken watch with you. Ask her directly about the discrepancy with Hackett's story. Observe her reaction carefully. You think she's lying. I think someone is lying. It might be Helena, or Hackett, or both, or neither, if there are 2 watches. Until we resolve this discrepancy, we're working blind. The telephone rang. I answered, Nero Wolfe's office. Mr. Goodwin, this is Lieutenant Brody, NYPD Homicide. I heard you've been asking questions about Julian Pembroke's death. Word traveled fast. That's right. We're working for Mrs. Pembroke. Well, stop. Pembroke's death was accidental. Case closed. Tell your employer he's wasting his time and Mrs. Pembroke's money. I'll convey your opinion, Lieutenant, but Mrs. Pembroke has the right to hire whoever she wants. She has the right to throw away her money, sure. But when private investigators start interfering in closed police cases, that's when I get interested. You find something relevant, you bring it to me. Understood? Crystal clear, Lieutenant. Good. Stay out of trouble, Goodwin. He hung up. I looked at Wolfe. Lieutenant Brodie. He's heard we're investigating and he's not happy about it. Predictable. The police dislike having their conclusions questioned. Did he threaten us? Warned us to share anything we find. Standard procedure. Wolfe grunted. We'll share our findings when we have findings worth sharing. Until then, we continue. He glanced at the clock. 9:15. That's enough for today. I'm going to read. You should rest. Tomorrow will be busy. I stood and stretched. Diana emerged from under my desk where she'd been sleeping, and Loyal wandered in from the kitchen where he'd probably been keeping Fritz company during dinner preparation. The brownstone settled into its evening routine. Wolfe with his book, Fritz in the kitchen. The dogs distributed throughout the house like living security sensors. I went upstairs to my room on the 3rd floor, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about the broken watch, about the discrepancy in Helena Pembroke's story, about the way the dogs had reacted to Gerard Fleming with such obvious distrust. Something was wrong with this case. The pieces didn't fit together the way they should. A watchmaker dies, apparently from a fall, but his widow insists it was murder, and she has a broken watch that supposedly proves it. Except the watch's story keeps changing. It was in the safe. No, it was at Hackett's apartment. No, it was here. No, it was there. Either someone was lying, or there were 2 watches. Or, and this thought came to me as I was finally drifting off, someone had deliberately created confusion about the watch to hide something else entirely. I'd ask Helena Pembroke about that in the morning, if she'd tell me the truth. Thursday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of October day that makes you remember why autumn is worth enduring before winter arrives. I was at my desk by 8:30, working through the mail while Fritz prepared breakfast and Wolfe conducted his morning ritual with the orchids. Caesar was in his usual spot near the hall, and Apollo was making his restless patrol of the 1st floor, checking windows and doors with the dedication of a professional security guard. At 9:15, I telephoned Helena Pembroke's apartment. She answered on the 2nd ring, her voice clear but tired. Mrs. Pembroke, Archie Goodwin. I need to speak with you this morning. I can come to your apartment, or you can come here. Your choice. A pause. Has something happened? We've learned some information that requires clarification. It's important. I see. Can you come here? I'd rather not go out this morning. She gave me an address on East 67th Street, a building that suggested money without flaunting it. I tucked the broken Patek Philippe in its box into my jacket pocket, told Fritz I'd be back by lunch, and headed out. The dogs escorted me to the door, their version of saying goodbye, and reminding me they'd expect a report when I returned. Caesar even gave my hand a brief nudge with his nose, which for him was practically an emotional farewell. I caught a cab at 9th Avenue and rode across town, watching the city wake up to another day of commerce and chaos. The taxi dropped me at a limestone building with a doorman who looked like he'd been hired for his ability to intimidate burglars just by existing. Archie Goodwin, for Mrs. Pembroke. He checked a list, nodded, and directed me to the elevator, 6th floor, apartment 6B. The elevator was one of those old-fashioned cage affairs operated by an attendant who looked like he remembered when Taft was president. He delivered me to the 6th floor without conversation, which suited me fine. Helena Pembroke answered her door dressed in black, appropriate for a new widow, but without the elaborate mourning costume of an earlier generation. Her face showed the strain of the past few days, but her composure was intact. Mr. Goodwin, please come in. The apartment was elegant without being ostentatious. Good furniture, carefully chosen art, books that looked read rather than decorative. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, and I counted 3 other clocks visible from the entrance hall. A woman married to a watchmaker would naturally collect timepieces. She led me to a sitting room with windows overlooking 67th Street and gestured to a chair. Can I offer you coffee? No, thank you. This won't take long. I pulled out my notebook. Mrs. Pembroke, I need to clarify something about the Patek Philippe. When you first came to see Mr. Wolfe, you said you found the watch in your husband's workshop safe on Tuesday. Is that correct? Yes. I went to collect Julian's personal effects and found it in the safe. And you sent it to Mr. Wolfe by messenger Wednesday morning? That's right. I pulled the watch box from my pocket and set it on the table between us. This watch. She looked at it but didn't touch it. Yes. Mrs. Pembroke, we spoke with Desmond Hackett yesterday. He told us you picked up that watch from his apartment on Monday afternoon. Not Tuesday from the workshop, but Monday from his home. He says Leonard Watts called and asked if you could borrow it, and you came to his apartment and collected it. Her face went very still. Outside, a truck rattled past on 67th Street. The grandfather clock ticked. She didn't speak. So I need to ask you directly, I continued. Which story is true? Did you get the watch from Hackett Monday, or from the workshop safe Tuesday? She stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to me. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. Both stories are true. I don't follow. She turned to face me. I picked up a watch from Desmond's apartment on Monday, but it wasn't the same watch I found in Julian's safe on Tuesday. The room seemed to get very quiet. Even the grandfather clock's ticking faded into background noise. You're saying there are two watches, I said slowly. Two Patek Philippe pocket watches from Yes. She returned to her chair and folded her hands in her lap, with the careful control of someone holding themselves together by force of will. I lied to you and Mr. Wolfe. Not about the murder. I truly believe Julian was killed, but I lied about the watch. Why? Because the truth is more complicated and more dangerous than I was ready to admit. She took a breath. Let me tell you what really happened. I flipped to a fresh page in my notebook. I'm listening. Monday morning, Leonard called me to tell me about Julian's death. I was devastated, but I was also suspicious. Julian never worked Sundays. Someone must have convinced him to go to the workshop. After I spoke with Leonard, I received a call from Gerard Fleming. The dealer? Yes. Gerard said he'd heard about Julian's death and wanted to offer condolences, but he also asked very carefully whether Julian had completed the authentication work on a Breguet watch. Gerard had brought him 2 weeks earlier. What kind of Breguet? Gerard didn't say specifically, but he seemed very anxious about it. He asked if I'd been to the workshop yet, if I'd seen the piece, if Julian had left any notes about it. His concern seemed excessive for routine authentication. What did you tell him? That I hadn't been to the workshop yet and didn't know anything about his piece. After we hung up, I started thinking, why was Gerard so concerned about that specific watch? What had Julian discovered that made Gerard nervous enough to call a grieving widow the day after her husband's death? So you went to the workshop? Not immediately. First Leonard called again. He said Desmond Hackett wanted to speak with me about the Patek Philippe. I telephoned Desmond, and he asked if I would come to his apartment. He had something important to discuss, so I went. And Desmond told me that Julian had called him Sunday evening around 9:30. Julian said there was a problem with the Patek Philippe, something he'd discovered after Desmond picked it up Friday. He needed to see the watch again urgently. Desmond lived on Park Avenue, close enough for Julian to reach quickly. So Desmond agreed to meet Julian at the workshop at 10 o'clock Sunday night and bring the watch. I stopped writing. Hackett went to the workshop Sunday night. But, according to what he told me Monday, yes, he brought the watch to Julian at 10 o'clock. Julian examined it again, said the problem was more complex than he'd thought, and asked to keep it overnight. He'd called Desmond in the morning. Desmond left the watch and went home. What time did Hackett leave the workshop? He said, around 10:30, which meant Desmond Hackett was possibly the last person to see Julian Pembroke alive, except for the killer, if there was one. Why didn't Hackett tell us this yesterday? Because I asked him not to. Helena's voice was steady. When he explained what happened, I realized the watch might be important. If Julian discovered something about it that required an urgent meeting, then that watch might contain evidence about who killed him. But if the killer knew I had the watch, I might be in danger too. So you took it from Hackett Monday afternoon? Yes, he gave it to me. I brought it home and examined it. The crystal was cracked. The watch was stopped at 10:47. Exactly as it had been when Julian called Desmond Sunday evening about the problem. What problem? What did Julian discover about the watch? Desmond didn't know. Julian wouldn't explain over the telephone, just said it was urgent, and he needed to see the watch immediately. I was writing fast now, trying to capture everything. So you have the watch from Hackett on Monday. Where does the workshop safe come into this? Tuesday morning I went to the workshop to collect Julian's personal effects. As I told you, Leonard helped me. We opened the safe together. Inside was another Patek Philippe pocket watch. Same era, same style, but different serial number. It was also broken, also stopped at 10:40. 2 watches, both broken at the same time. Yes, both 1885 Patek Philippes. Both stopped at 10:47, but different watches. She looked directly at me. That's when I knew Julian had been murdered, because there was no legitimate reason for 2 nearly identical watches to both be broken at the exact moment he died. What did you do? I took the second watch from the safe without telling Leonard. I told him I was taking personal items, files, photographs, Julian's tools. He didn't question it. Then I went home and compared the 2 watches. And the watch from Desmond, the one Julian had repaired, is genuine. Original mechanism, proper serial numbers, authentic Patek Philippe from 8. The watch from the safe is different. Fake? Not exactly. It's also a genuine Patek Philippe from approximately the same era. But it's not the same watch. Different serial number, slightly different engraving on the case. Someone switched them. I sat back in my chair processing this. Let me make sure I understand. Julian repaired Hackett's watch, did beautiful work. Hackett picked it up Friday. Then Sunday evening, Julian calls Hackett claiming there's a problem with the watch and needs to see it urgently. Hackett brings it to the workshop at 10. Julian examines it, keeps it, sends Hackett home. Sometime after that, Julian dies. When you check the workshop safe Tuesday, you find a different Patek Philippe that's also broken. Correct. Which means Julian discovered someone had switched the watches. He called Hackett to get the real one back so he could verify the switch. And whoever made the switch killed him to cover it up. That's what I believe, yes. But who made the switch? And when? And why? Helena shook her head. I don't know. That's why I came to Mr. Wolfe. I knew the police wouldn't investigate. They'd already closed the case. But the existence of 2 watches proves Julian didn't just fall and hit his head. Someone killed him to prevent him from exposing the switch. Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning? Because I was frightened. If the killer knew I had both watches and understood their significance, I'd be the next target. I thought if I gave one watch to Mr. Wolfe anonymously, he could investigate without putting me at direct risk. Then I could come forward later with my suspicions. But you kept the second watch. I didn't know what else to do with it. I couldn't leave it in the workshop where Leonard might find it and start asking questions. I couldn't give it to Desmond. He'd want to know where it came from. So I kept it here, hidden. I need to see it. She stood and left the room. I heard a door open, then close. She returned carrying a velvet pouch. She opened it and extracted a pocket watch, setting it carefully on the table beside the one I'd brought. They were nearly identical, both gold cases with intricate engraving, both white enamel faces with Roman numerals, both stopped at 1047, both with cracked crystals showing impact damage. But looking closely, I could see the differences. The engraving patterns were similar, but not exact. One had vines and flowers, the other had vines and birds. The serial numbers visible through the open backs were different. These were 2 separate watches from the same manufacturer and era, but definitely not the same piece. Mrs. Pembroke, this changes everything. We need to bring both watches to Mr. Wolfe immediately, and we need to find out who had access to make the switch and why anyone would bother switching 2 valuable antique watches in the first place. She nodded. I know. I'm sorry I lied initially. I was trying to protect myself and maybe being too clever about it. Who knew about the authentication work your husband was doing? Who knew he had valuable pieces in his workshop? All his regular clients. Leonard, obviously. And anyone Leonard might have mentioned it to. Julian was discreet, but he wasn't secretive. He'd talk about his work with other professionals in the field. Gerard Fleming? Almost certainly. Gerard and Julian consulted each other occasionally, when a piece required specialized knowledge. I stood and carefully wrapped both watches in the velvet pouch. I'm taking both of these to Mr. Wolfe and Mrs. Pembroke. If someone killed your husband over these watches, you need to be careful. Maybe stay with a friend for a few days. Don't be alone. I'll be all right. The building has good security. Good security didn't help your husband. These watches were important enough to kill for once. They might be important enough to kill for again. She walked me to the door. Mr. Goodwin, please find out who killed Julian. Not for the insurance money. I don't care about that anymore. But he deserves justice. We'll do our best. Keep your door locked. Don't let anyone in you don't know. And call us immediately if anything unusual happens. I left her there in her apartment surrounded by her clocks and her grief, and headed back to West 35th Street with 2 watches that had somehow gotten a man killed. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they were forming wasn't clear yet. Wolfe would know what to make of it. He always did. I walked into the office at 11:40 to find Wolfe behind his desk, reading, and all 6 dogs arranged in various stages of relaxation around the room. Caesar looked up when I entered, assessed that I'd returned safely, and went back to sleep. Mars didn't even bother opening his eyes. "You're back early," Wolfe said without looking up from his book. "I'm back with interesting news." I dropped the velvet pouch on his desk. "There are 2 watches." That got his attention. He set down the book, The Conquests of Charlemagne, from the spine, and opened the pouch. He examined both watches with the careful intensity of a jeweler evaluating diamonds, using his desk lamp for illumination and a magnifying glass he kept in his drawer for examining rare book pages. After several minutes he looked up. Same era, same manufacturer, different pieces, both broken at the same time. "Explain." I gave him the complete report from Helena Pembroke, Hackett's Sunday night visit to the workshop, Julian's urgent call about discovering a problem, the second watch found in the safe, the switch that must have occurred between Friday and Sunday. Wolfe listened without interrupting, his eyes half closed in concentration. When I finished, he sat in silence for perhaps 2 minutes, a long time when you're waiting for a 1/7 of a ton genius to process information. Finally, Mrs. Pembroke lied to us initially about where she obtained the watch. She admits it, says she was frightened and trying to be clever. Clever people who lie usually create more problems than they solve. He picked up the watch from Hackett and studied it again. But in this case, her deception has inadvertently provided valuable information. If she'd told us the truth from the beginning, we might not have interviewed Hackett, and we wouldn't have discovered the discrepancy. So what happened? Someone switched Hackett's watch for a similar one? Obviously, the question is, when, where, and why? He set down the watches and steepled his fingers. Consider the timeline. Friday afternoon, Hackett picks up his repaired watch from Pembroke's workshop. The work is complete. The watch is functioning perfectly. Pembroke has documented everything meticulously. Hackett takes the watch home to his Park Avenue apartment, where it presumably stays until Sunday evening, when Julian calls him. Precisely, Sunday evening at 9:30, Pembroke telephones Hackett, claiming he's discovered a problem with the watch and needs to examine it immediately. Hackett brings the watch to the workshop at 10 o'clock. According to the doorman's testimony, Pembroke entered the building alone at 10 o'clock, but he must have already arranged to meet Hackett there. Or Hackett arrived before the doorman noticed him. Unlikely. Mr. McManus seemed observant and professional. More probable is that Hackett arrived after Pembroke, perhaps through a rear entrance or side door. The building only has one entrance, the front door. Then Hackett arrived before Pembroke and waited, or arrived shortly after in a manner the doorman didn't notice or remember. Wolfe waved a hand dismissively. Regardless, both men were in the workshop Sunday night. Pembroke examined the watch Hackett brought, recognized it was not the same watch he'd repaired, and kept it to verify the switch. He sent Hackett home. Then someone killed him before he could expose the fraud. But who made the switch, and when? The when is clear. Somewhere between Friday afternoon when Hackett took the original watch home, and Sunday evening when he brought a different watch to the workshop. The who requires more analysis. I pulled out my notebook. Hackett had the watch in his possession all weekend, so either he made the switch himself, or someone accessed his apartment and switched the watches without him noticing. Is Mr. Hackett the sort of man who wouldn't notice if someone replaced one of his valuable collectibles with a similar but different piece? He's a serious collector. He'd notice. Therefore, either Hackett made the switch deliberately, or the switch occurred before he left the workshop Friday. Let's examine both possibilities. Wolfe poured beer, drank, and continued. Possibility 1. Hackett made the switch. He picks up his repaired watch Friday, takes it home, and substitutes a similar watch from his collection. Why? Perhaps the original had some hidden value beyond its obvious worth. A secret compartment, unusual provenance, connection to a famous owner, or perhaps he planned insurance fraud, claimed the original was stolen, collect payment while keeping the real piece. Then why bring the fake watch back to Julian Sunday night? Because Pembroke discovered something about the original watch Friday that he didn't mention when Hackett picked it up. Perhaps he found identifying marks, or documentation, or some feature that would expose Hackett's plans. Pembroke called Hackett demanding to see the watch again. Hackett had to produce a watch, so he brought the substitution, hoping Pembroke wouldn't immediately detect the difference. But Julian did detect it, and died as a result. If Hackett is the killer, the motive is self-preservation, covering up his fraud. I made notes. What's possibility 2? Possibility 2. Someone else made the switch, either at the workshop before Hackett picked it up Friday, or at Hackett's apartment afterward. If it occurred at the workshop, the suspect pool includes Leonard Watts, who had full access, and anyone else who could have entered the workshop between when Pembroke completed the work and when Hackett collected it. Leonard was there all day Friday. He could have switched the watches easily. Indeed. And his motive. If the original watch had some special value that Leonard discovered, he could steal it, substitute a similar watch, and profit from the theft. Collectors pay premium prices for pieces with unusual history or provenance. But then Pembroke discovers the switch, and Leonard must silence him. It fits. Leonard found the body Monday morning. He could have killed Julian Sunday night, left and returned Monday to discover the corpse. Wolfe nodded slowly. Possible. What doesn't fit is why Pembroke would call Hackett demanding to see the watch. If Leonard made the switch at the workshop, Pembroke would have known before Hackett ever left with it Friday. He wouldn't have let a fake leave his workshop. Unless Leonard made the switch after Pembroke left Friday evening. Julian locks up and goes home. Leonard returns with his key, enters the workshop, switches the watches, and leaves. Saturday, Julian returns and notices something wrong, but doesn't realize what until Sunday. Then he calls Hackett to verify. Convoluted but conceivable. Wolfe drank more beer. Or possibility 3. The switch occurred at Hackett's apartment between Friday and Sunday. Someone broke in, stole the original, left a substitute. Who would know Hackett had just picked up the watch? And who would have access to a nearly identical 1885 Patek Philippe to use as a substitution? An excellent question. Wolfe looked at me. Who in our suspect pool collects or deals in rare watches? Hackett himself, obviously. Gerard Fleming deals in them professionally. Claudia Thornhill collects them. Benjamin Rourke owns chronometers, but probably not pocket watches. Walter Spence, we haven't interviewed him yet, has a regulator clock. And Leonard Watts works with valuable watches daily. He'd have access to pieces in the workshop that could serve as substitutions. I flipped back through my notes. Wait, Mrs. Thornhill mentioned that Julian was authenticating 4 Victorian pendant watches for her. 3 were genuine. 1 was a clever forgery. Correct case. Wrong mechanism. Relevant how? If someone can create a clever forgery with the right case and wrong movement, they could potentially do the reverse. Put a valuable movement in a less valuable case, or switch movements between 2 similar watches. That would explain why Julian needed to examine the watch again. He might have noticed something subtle about the mechanism that didn't match his Friday documentation. Wolfe closed his eyes. Speculative but not unreasonable. The core question remains, who benefits from switching these specific watches? Follow the benefit, and we'll find the killer. So what's our next move? We need to determine what made Hackett's watch special. Archie, you'll visit the Rutherford Museum. Pembroke was consulting with them about an 18th century bracket clock. Museums keep extensive records of timepiece provenance and history. See if they have information about significant Patek Philippe pocket watches from the 1880s. Meanwhile, I'll have Saul Panzer investigate Hackett's apartment building. I want to know if anyone entered or left Sunday, between the time Hackett departed for the workshop and when he returned home. You think someone followed Hackett, knew he was meeting Julian, and broke into his apartment to plant evidence or steal something? I think we don't have enough information yet. Gather more data and perhaps the picture will clarify. The phone rang. I answered. Nero Wolfe's office. Mr. Goodwin, this is Walter Spence. You wanted to speak with me. I'm free this afternoon if that works. I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Wolfe, who nodded. Can you come to West 35th Street at 3 o'clock, Mr. Spence? I'll be there. After I hung up, Wolfe said, interview Spence. Determine if he has any connection to Patek Philippe watches or to Hackett. Also determine his whereabouts Sunday evening. Another potential suspect? Everyone is a potential suspect until we prove otherwise. Now go. The museum closes at 5. You have limited time. I stood, grabbed my hat and coat, and headed for the door. Loyal joined me from the kitchen, tail wagging, clearly hoping for a walk. Sorry, boy, not this time. You stay and guard the fortress. He accepted this with canine grace and returned to the kitchen where Fritz was probably preparing lunch. I stepped out into the October afternoon, the 2 watches safely locked in Wolfe's safe, and caught a cab to the Rutherford Museum on 5th Avenue. Time to learn what made an 1885 Patek Philippe worth killing for. The Rutherford Museum occupied a limestone mansion on 5th Avenue that had belonged to the Rutherford family before they decided their collection of clocks, watches and timekeeping devices should benefit the public rather than gathering dust in a private residence. Smart decision. Museums don't pay inheritance taxes. I climbed the steps and entered a marble-floored lobby where a receptionist sat behind a desk that probably predated the Civil War. She was maybe 60, with grey hair and the kind of efficient demeanor that suggested she'd been organizing things since birth. Good afternoon. I'm Archie Goodwin, investigating the death of Julian Pembroke. I understand he was consulting with the museum about an 18th century bracket clock. Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine sadness. Yes, Mr. Pembroke was working with our acquisitions department. His death is a terrible loss. Are you with the police? Private investigator, working for Mrs. Pembroke. I'd like to speak with whoever was working with Julian on the bracket clock. That would be Dr. Emerson Caldwell, our curator of horology. Let me see if he's available. She picked up a telephone, spoke quietly, then nodded. Dr. Caldwell can see you. 3rd floor, office 312. Take the elevator to your right. I found Dr. Caldwell in an office crammed with reference books, filing cabinets and photographs of elaborate timepieces covering every wall. He was 70 if he was a day, with white hair, thick glasses and the abstracted air of someone who spent more time with objects than people. He stood when I entered and offered a hand. Mr. Goodwin, terrible business about Julian. Absolutely terrible. He was one of the finest horologists in the country. So I'm learning, I understand he was consulting with you? Yes. We're considering acquiring an 18th century bracket clock, Thomas Tompion. Very rare, extraordinary condition. We needed Julian's authentication and assessment before committing to the purchase. Bracket clocks of that era can be tricky. Lots of forgeries, lots of altered pieces. Julian had the expertise to verify provenance. Had he completed the assessment? Not yet. He'd examined the clock twice, was waiting for some documentation from England to verify the maker's marks. We were expecting his final report next week. Caldwell shook his head. Now we'll need to find another expert, which won't be easy. Julian's reputation was impeccable. Dr. Caldwell, I need your help with something unrelated to the bracket clock. Have you ever heard of significant Patek Philippe pocket watches from the 80s, pieces with unusual history or special provenance? His eyes lit up behind the thick glasses. I'd hit the right topic. Patek Philippe from the 1880s. Absolutely. That was a remarkable period for the company. They were creating pieces for European royalty, wealthy American industrialists, heads of state. Many of those watches have fascinating histories. Any specific pieces that would be particularly valuable? He moved to one of his filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder. Let me check our records. We maintain documentation on significant timepieces, even if we don't own them. Helps with authentication and provenance research. He flipped through pages, muttering to himself. 1880s, Patek Philippe, pocket watches. Ah, here's something interesting. He pulled out a sheet of paper covered in typed notes. In 1885, Patek Philippe created a series of 6 matched pocket watches commissioned by a consortium of New York businessmen. The watches were intended as gifts for visiting European dignitaries during trade negotiations. Each watch was identical in appearance: gold case, white enamel dial, Roman numerals, but each had unique internal markings identifying which dignitary it was intended for. 6 watches. What happened to them? 4 were given as intended. 2 were never delivered. The trade negotiations collapsed before the presentation ceremony. Those 2 watches returned to the consortium members who'd commissioned them. Over the years, they've occasionally appeared at auction or in private sales. Would one of those watches be significantly more valuable than a standard 1885 Patek Philippe? Considerably more valuable. The historical provenance, the unusual story, the craftsmanship, collectors pay premium prices for pieces with that kind of documentation. A standard 1885 Patek Philippe in good condition might sell for $5,000 to $8,000. One of these special pieces could fetch $20,000 to $30,000, possibly more to the right buyer. I made careful notes. Do you have serial numbers for those 6 watches? Caldwell ran his finger down the page. 3 of them, yes. The museum acquired documentation from an estate sale years ago. Let me see. He read off 3 numbers. I wrote them down and compared them to the serial numbers I'd copied from the 2 watches in Wolfe's safe. No match. These aren't the same pieces, I said. Could there be other Patek Philippes from that era with similar historical significance? Undoubtedly. The company created hundreds of unique pieces during that period. Without seeing the specific watches or having their provenance documentation, I can't tell you which ones would command premium prices. Why? Have you found something significant? Possibly. If I brought you 2 1885 Patek Philippes, could you examine them and tell me their history? If they have proper serial numbers and maker's marks, I could research their provenance. It might take several days. I'd need to consult records in Switzerland, check auction house databases, review estate documentation. But yes, I could determine their background. I may take you up on that. One more question. Did Julian Pembroke ever mention working on significant Patek Philippe pieces? Maybe something for a private client. Caldwell thought. Not specifically. Julian was discreet about his client work, professional ethics, but he did mention once that he'd handled some extraordinary pieces over the years. He said the challenge wasn't the mechanical repairs, but ensuring the provenance documentation remained accurate. He hated seeing valuable pieces with falsified histories. Did he mention anyone who might falsify histories? Not by name, but he did say that some dealers were less scrupulous than others about verifying provenance before sales. He considered it his duty to catch those errors before collectors were defrauded. I thanked Dr. Caldwell and headed back to West 35th Street with more questions than answers. If the Patek Philippe Hackett owned had special historical provenance that made it worth $20,000 or $30,000 instead of $5,000 to $8,000, that could explain why someone would go to the trouble of switching it, steal the valuable watch, substitute a similar but less significant piece, and profit from the theft while the victim doesn't immediately realize they've been robbed. But who would know about the special provenance? And who would have access to a similar watch to use as a substitution? I arrived back at the brownstone at 2:45, 15 minutes before Walter Spence was scheduled to arrive. Wolfe was at his desk with a book and beer. Caesar was in his usual position near the door, and Minerva had claimed the spot under the window where she could watch the street. Well? Wolfe said. I gave him the report from Dr. Caldwell, the story about the 6 matched watches from 1885, the potential value increase for pieces with special provenance, and the fact that none of the serial numbers matched our 2 watches. Wolfe listened, nodding occasionally. So we have 2 watches from the same era and manufacturer. One or both may have special provenance that increases value significantly. Someone switched them, either stealing a valuable piece or planting a less valuable one. Pembroke discovered the switch and was killed to prevent exposure. That's my theory. Insufficient data for a theory. It's merely a hypothesis, and not a particularly strong one. He closed his book. We need to determine which watch is which. Is the watch from Hackett the valuable piece, or is the watch from the safe the valuable piece? Or are both ordinary, and we're chasing shadows? Dr. Caldwell offered to research their provenance if we bring him the watches. Do so tomorrow. But first, let's interview Mr. Spence. Perhaps he'll provide the missing piece. The buzzer sounded at precisely 3 o'clock. Fritz admitted Walter Spence, who entered with the careful movements of someone navigating an unfamiliar space. He was in his late 60s, thin and stooped, with wispy white hair, and the kind of face that suggested a lifetime of indoor work. He wore a brown suit that had been expensive once, but was now showing its age. The dogs performed their inspection. Caesar approached, sniffed, and stepped back. Verdict harmless. Spence reached down carefully and let Caesar sniff his hand more thoroughly, showing the respect of someone familiar with dogs. "Beautiful animals," he said. "Dobermans?" "5 Dobermans, and 1 pit bull," I said. "Please, have a seat." Spence settled into the red leather chair and looked at Wolfe with obvious interest. "I've heard about you, Mr. Wolfe. They say you never leave this brownstone but solve cases the police can't crack." "They exaggerate. I leave the brownstone when absolutely necessary, though such occasions are blessedly rare. Mr. Spence, thank you for coming. You were Julian Pembroke's client. For 15 years, I collect antique clocks, regulators, mostly, precision timekeeping instruments, from the 18th and 19th centuries. Julian maintained my collection and authenticated new acquisitions. Tell me about the regulator he was working on. An English regulator from 1820, maker unknown but high quality. I purchased it from an estate sale in Boston 3 months ago. The mechanism needed restoration. Some parts were worn, others were replacements from the wrong era. I brought it to Julian in September. He said the restoration would take 3 to 4 months. Have you retrieved it? Not yet. Leonard Watts called me yesterday, saying it was still in the workshop, only partially completed. I'll collect it when it's finished, though I don't know who will complete the work now that Julian's gone. Where were you Sunday evening, Mr. Spence? He didn't hesitate. At the New York Public Library on 5th Avenue. I was researching clockmakers for an article I'm writing. I publish occasionally in Horological Journal. The library is open until 9 on Sundays. I was there from 4 until closing, then took the subway home to my apartment in Brooklyn. Arrived around 10:30. Can anyone verify your presence at the library? The librarian might remember me. I spoke with her about accessing some archived materials, but I don't know her name. Wolfe nodded. Did Julian Pembroke ever discuss other clients with you? Other projects he was working on? Occasionally. Professional matters only. He never gossiped. He mentioned he was authenticating some pieces for Claudia Thornhill, working on maritime chronometers for a salvage operator, consulting with the Rutherford Museum. Standard work for someone of his expertise. Did he ever mention Desmond Hackett? Spence thought. The name sounds familiar. Is he a collector? Yes. Textiles fortune, now retired. Collects watches. I may have met him at an auction once, but I don't recall Julian mentioning him specifically. Why? Mr. Hackett was a regular client. We're trying to understand Mr. Pembroke's business relationships. I see. Well, I can tell you Julian was respected by everyone in the field. Dealers trusted his authentication. Collectors relied on his expertise. His death is a significant loss. Did you know Gerard Fleming? At the mention of Fleming's name, something shifted in Spence's expression, subtle but definite. I know Gerard. We've done business over the years. What kind of business? I've purchased several clocks through his shop. He specializes in rare timepieces. Clocks, watches, chronometers. He has good connections to estate sales and European auctions. Do you trust him? Spence chose his words carefully. Gerard is knowledgeable and professional, but he's also a businessman first and a scholar second. Julian was the opposite. Scholar first, businessman second. That difference created occasional friction. Friction about what? About authentication standards, mostly. Gerard would sometimes push for Julian to be more flexible in his assessments. If a piece was mostly authentic with a few replaced parts, Gerard would want Julian to authenticate it as original. Julian refused. He insisted on complete honesty and documentation, even if it cost him business. Did this friction ever become hostile? Not that I witnessed personally, but I heard from other collectors that Gerard wasn't happy when Julian's authentication killed sales. Dealers don't like losing commission. Wolfe drank beer and studied Spence. One final question. Have you ever owned or seen a Patek Philippe pocket watch from 18? Gold case, white enamel dial, Roman numerals. Spence shook his head. I collect clocks, not pocket watches. Different specialization, though I've certainly seen such pieces at auctions or in other collections. They're beautiful instruments. Patek Philippe's craftsmanship from that era was exceptional. Why? Merely curious. Thank you for coming, Mr. Spence. If we have further questions, we'll contact you. After Spence left with Fritz seeing him out and Mars following to watch through the bulletproof glass, I looked at Wolfe, another suspect with no alibi and no obvious motive. On the contrary, Mr. Spence has a motive. He does. He's writing articles for professional journals. Academics and scholars often develop obsessions with rare pieces that would enhance their research and reputation. If Spence learned about a particularly significant Patek Philippe, he might covet it for his own collection or research. Theft disguised as a switch would allow him to acquire it without obvious connection to the crime. But Spence collects clocks, not watches. He says he collects clocks, but a serious horologist appreciates all forms of timekeeping instruments. His specialization doesn't preclude broader interests. I had to admit it was possible, so our suspect pool now includes Hackett himself, Leonard Watts, Gerard Fleming, and Walter Spence, plus Helena Pembroke, if we're being thorough, and Claudia Thornhill, who has means and expertise even if motive is less obvious, and Benjamin Rourke, whose maritime chronometer work gives him horological knowledge, and anyone else who might have learned about those watches through the grapevine of collectors and dealers. Wolfe closed his eyes. Too many suspects, too many possibilities, insufficient proof. So what's our next move? You'll take both watches to Dr. Caldwell tomorrow morning. Have him research their provenance thoroughly. Meanwhile, I'll have Saul investigate Hackett's building and Leonard Watts's background more carefully. And you'll re-interview Leonard Watts at the workshop. This time, examine the safe more carefully. I want to know if there are any other pieces missing or switched. You think Leonard is our killer? I think Leonard had the best opportunity. He had keys, access, knowledge of what pieces were in the workshop. If he discovered that one of Hackett's watches had special value, he could have made the switch easily. When Pembroke discovered the theft, Leonard had to silence him. But why would Pembroke call Hackett instead of confronting Leonard directly? Perhaps because he wasn't certain yet which watch was which. He needed to examine Hackett's watch to verify the switch. Once he confirmed it, he would have confronted Leonard Monday morning. But Leonard couldn't allow that. It made sense, but it also felt incomplete, like we were missing something obvious that would tie everything together. The telephone rang. I answered. Nero Wolfe's office. Mr. Goodwin, this is Desmond Hackett. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe immediately. It's urgent. I covered the mouthpiece. Hackett says it's urgent. Wolfe sighed and nodded. What's the urgency, Mr. Hackett? Someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything valuable. Jewelry, cash, all still here. But they went through my watch collection very carefully. Every piece was moved, examined and replaced slightly differently than how I keep them. Someone was looking for something specific. When did this happen? I've been out all afternoon, returned home 20 minutes ago and found the apartment had been entered. The door wasn't forced. Someone used a key or picked the lock professionally. Mr. Goodwin, I think someone is looking for that Patek Philippe, and if they find out I gave it to Helena, she might be in danger. I looked at Wolfe. He was sitting very still, his eyes open now and focused. Mr. Hackett, thank you for calling. Don't touch anything else. We'll be in touch shortly. I hung up and repeated the conversation. Wolfe's expression was grim. So the killer is still looking for the watch, which means we're getting close to something they desperately want to protect. He pushed back from his desk. Archie, telephone Helena Pembroke. Tell her not to open her door for anyone except us. Then go to her apartment with Saul. I'll call him immediately. Bring her and both watches here. She'll stay in the guest room tonight where we can protect her. You think she's in real danger? I think someone has killed once already and is now searching for evidence. Mrs. Pembroke has that evidence hidden in her apartment. Yes, she's in danger. Go, now. I grabbed my coat and hat. Caesar rose, as if sensing the urgency. Wolfe noticed. Take him with you. And Archie, be careful. We're dealing with someone desperate enough to kill. Desperate people make mistakes, but they're also the most dangerous. I called Helena Pembroke. She answered immediately, her voice tight with stress. I told her we were coming and not to open the door for anyone else. Then I called Saul Panzer, caught him at home and arranged to meet him at her building in 20 minutes. Caesar followed me to the door. Fritz appeared from the kitchen, took one look at my face and Caesar's alert posture and said, "Be careful, Archie." "Always am, Fritz," Save me some dinner. I stepped out into the October afternoon with Caesar at my side, wondering if we were about to catch a killer or walk into a trap. Sometimes in this business, the line between those two outcomes is thinner than you'd like. Saul Panzer was waiting outside Helena Pembroke's building when I arrived with Caesar. Saul was a small man, unremarkable in appearance except for the intelligence in his eyes and the way he noticed everything. He'd worked for Wolfe longer than I had, and I trusted him as much as I trusted anyone in the detective business. He looked at Caesar and raised an eyebrow. Expecting trouble? Wolfe thought it prudent. Someone broke into Hackett's apartment this afternoon searching for something. We think Mrs. Pembroke might be next. Then, let's get her out of there. The doorman recognized me from my morning visit and let us in without questions, though he studied Caesar with professional interest. That's a serious dog. He's had a serious education, I said. Mrs. Pembroke is expecting us. We took the elevator to the 6th floor. Caesar was perfectly behaved, standing calmly beside me, but alert to every sound and smell. When we reached 6B, I knocked 3 times, our arranged signal. Helena opened the door immediately. She looked frightened but composed, still wearing the black dress from this morning. Thank God you're here. I've been sitting here watching the door for the past hour, imagining someone breaking in. Not likely with that doorman downstairs, I said. But Mr. Wolfe wants you to spend the night at the brownstone where we can keep an eye on you. Pack a bag with whatever you need. We're leaving in 5 minutes. She nodded and disappeared into the bedroom. Saul moved to the window and looked down at the street, checking sight lines and potential approaches. Caesar took up position near the door, his ears forward and alert. I checked the apartment quickly. All windows locked, no signs of tampering, no evidence anyone had broken in. But if someone had gotten into Hackett's Park Avenue apartment professionally, they could get into this one too. Helena emerged with a small overnight case. I brought the watch, the one from the safe. I didn't know if you'd want it. We want both of them. We're taking them to an expert tomorrow for provenance research. She locked the apartment door, and we headed for the elevator. Caesar stayed between her and the hallway, positioning himself as a barrier. The elevator arrived. We descended to the lobby, and I was starting to think we'd make it out without incident, when the doorman called out, "Mrs. Pembroke? A gentleman was here earlier asking for you. Said he was a friend of your late husband." We stopped. "What gentleman?" I asked. "Well, didn't give his name. Came by around 2 o'clock. I told him Mrs. Pembroke wasn't receiving visitors. He left a card." The doorman pulled an envelope from his desk drawer. "Asked me to give you this." I took the envelope. My name was written on the front, in neat printing. Mrs. Helena Pembroke. I opened it carefully. Inside was a business card for Gerard Fleming's shop on Madison Avenue, and a handwritten note. "Mrs. Pembroke, I need to speak with you urgently about a watch your husband was authenticating for me. It's extremely important. Please call me as soon as possible. Gerard Fleming." I showed the note to Saul, who read it and frowned. Interesting timing. Very interesting. I tucked the card in my pocket. "Mrs. Pembroke, did your husband mention any work he was doing for Gerard Fleming?" "He mentioned Gerard occasionally, but not about any specific piece recently." "Why?" "Because Fleming came here this afternoon looking for you, claiming he needs to discuss a watch. And this afternoon, someone broke into Hackett's apartment, searching through his watch collection. The timing seems more than coincidental." We left the building, and I flagged a taxi. Caesar jumped in first, taking up a position where he could watch both the driver and the street behind us. Saul got in front with the driver, his hand near his pocket where I knew he kept a gun. Helena and I took the back seat. 35th Street, west of 9th Avenue, I told the driver. As we headed across town, Helena said quietly, "You think Gerard killed Julian?" "I think Gerard is very interested in locating a specific watch, and his timing is suspicious. But I don't know yet if he's a killer or just an opportunist." "What's the difference?" "About 20 years in prison." We arrived at the brownstone without incident. Fritz had the door open before we reached the steps. He'd been watching through the one-way mirror. Caesar trotted in first, checked the front room and hall, and gave the all-clear with a tail wag. Wolfe was in the office. He looked up as we entered, his eyes moving from Helena to me to Saul. "Any problems?" "None getting her out. But Gerard Fleming visited her building this afternoon. asking to speak with her urgently about a watch Julian was authenticating. Left a note. I handed him Fleming's card and note. He read it, set it on his desk and looked at Helena. Mrs. Pembroke, did your husband mention authenticating a watch for Gerard Fleming recently? No, but Julian didn't always tell me about every piece he was working on. Would Leonard Watts know? Probably. He maintained the client files. Wolfe nodded. Mrs. Pembroke, Fritz will show you to the guest room on the 3rd floor. You'll be safe here. The brownstone has bulletproof windows, secure doors, and 6 dogs who don't sleep much. Tomorrow morning, Archie will take both watches to a museum curator who'll research their provenance. Once we understand what we're dealing with, we'll know who killed your husband and why. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. I can't tell you how much. He waved a hand dismissively. You're paying me $20,000. Thank me when we've earned it. He looked at Fritz. Show her upstairs. Give her whatever she needs. After Helena and Fritz left, Wolfe looked at Saul. I need you to watch this building tonight. Someone may attempt to approach it. If they do, I want to know who. Where do you want me? In the front room with a view of the street. Archie will spell you at 2 a.m. Between you, the dogs and the fortifications, we should be secure, but vigilance is required. Understood. Saul settled into the front room with a thermos of coffee Fritz prepared. Mars and Apollo joined him, apparently understanding their assignment. I returned to the office. You really think someone will try to break in here? I think someone killed Julian Pembroke to prevent him from exposing a fraud or theft. That someone has now searched Hackett's apartment looking for evidence. Helena Pembroke has the evidence they're seeking. They may not know she's here, but if they do, desperation might overcome caution. Breaking into this brownstone would require either stupidity or desperation. The dogs alone would deter most criminals, but not all. Remember the Barstow affair. Someone penetrated our defenses then. It could happen again. He was right, though I hated admitting it. What do you want me to do? Research Gerard Fleming. Call Lon Cohen at the Gazette. He'll have information on Fleming's business, reputation, and any questionable dealings. I want to know if Fleming has financial problems that might motivate theft. Also call Leonard Watts. Tell him we need to review Julian's client files tomorrow morning. I want to see every piece Fleming brought to Pembroke in the past 6 months. I spent the next hour on the telephone. Lon Cohen, Wolfe's contact at the newspaper, had plenty to say about Gerard Fleming. The dealer had a reputation for high-quality inventory, but also for occasionally pushing ethical boundaries. He'd been sued twice by collectors claiming pieces he'd sold weren't as represented. Both suits settled out of court, suggesting Fleming had paid to make problems disappear. Word is Fleming's been having cash flow problems, Lon said. Bought heavily at auctions 6 months ago. Prices have softened. He's stuck with expensive inventory he can't move. Nothing desperate yet, but he's feeling pressure. Enough pressure to commit fraud or theft. I wouldn't bet against it. Fleming's ambitious and not overly burdened with conscience. Why? What's he done? Can't tell you yet. But if this pans out, you'll get the story first. I'll hold you to that, Archie. I called Leonard Watts at his apartment. He sounded surprised to hear from me. Mr. Goodwin, has something happened? We need to review Julian's client files tomorrow morning, specifically anything related to Gerard Fleming. Can you meet us at the workshop at 9? Yes, of course, but why Fleming specifically? He came to Mrs. Pembroke's building this afternoon, claiming he needs to discuss a watch Julian was authenticating. We're trying to verify the claim. Silence for a moment. Then, Julian wasn't authenticating anything for Fleming. I'd know. I maintain all the files. You're certain? Absolutely. Fleming hasn't brought us any pieces in at least 8 months. Julian was actually relieved. He didn't enjoy dealing with Fleming after the Breguet incident. What Breguet incident? About 18 months ago, Fleming brought a Breguet pocket watch for authentication. Claimed it was from 1810. Julian discovered it was forged 1850 watch with fake signatures and markings. Fleming had already promised it to Claudia Thornhill based on the earlier date. When Julian's report killed the sale, Fleming was furious. He accused Julian of being too rigid, too demanding. They argued. Fleming left saying he'd never bring business to Julian again. And he kept that promise. As far as I know, yes. So why would he suddenly claim Julian was authenticating something for him? It doesn't make sense. That's what we're trying to figure out. 9 o'clock tomorrow? I'll be there. I hung up and gave Wolfe the report. Fleming's financial pressures, his reputation for ethical flexibility, and Leonard's confirmation that Fleming hadn't done business with Julian in months. Wolfe listened, nodding slowly. So Fleming's note to Helena is a fabrication. He wants to speak with her about a non-existent watch. Why? Because he wants to find out what she knows about the Patek Philippe, or he wants to get the watch from her, or he wants to silence her before she reveals something that implicates him. Wolfe closed his eyes. The pieces are assembling, Archie. Fleming has financial motivation. He has expertise to recognize a valuable watch and arrange a switch. He has or had access to Julian's workshop through their professional relationship, and he's now actively seeking Helena, using a transparent lie to arrange a meeting. So Fleming is our killer. Insufficient proof for a conclusion, but he's certainly our primary suspect. He opened his eyes. Tomorrow you'll take the watches to Dr. Caldwell for provenance research. While he works on that, you'll meet Leonard at the workshop and examine the files. I want to know everything Fleming brought to Julian over the years. Look for patterns, for pieces that might have unusual value, for any indication Fleming knew about valuable provenance before Julian's authentication. And if Fleming shows up at the workshop, be courteous but reveal nothing, and Archie, take Caesar with you. I don't want you alone if Fleming becomes desperate. We ate dinner at 8:30. Fritz had prepared veal cutlets with mushroom sauce, and even my worry about the case couldn't diminish my appreciation for his cooking. Helena joined us, looking calmer now that she was surrounded by bulletproof glass and vigilant dogs. Diana had attached herself to Helena, following her from room to room with protective dedication. She likes you, I said. Diana doesn't usually attach to guests. I like her too. Julian wanted dogs, but our apartment didn't allow them. Maybe after all this is settled, she left the thought unfinished. After dinner, Helena went upstairs to the guest room. Fritz settled in the kitchen with Minerva and Loyal for company. I checked on Saul in the front room. He was alert and watching the street through a gap in the curtains. Mars and Apollo were with him, both Dobermans relaxed but aware. Quiet so far, Saul said. A few cars, some pedestrians, nothing suspicious. I'll relieve you at 2. If anything moves wrong out there, shout. The whole house will hear you. Back in the office, Wolfe was reading and drinking beer. Caesar was at his usual post near the door, eyes half closed, but ears tracking every sound in the brownstone. Go to bed, Archie. You're relieving Saul in 5 hours. You'll need rest. What about you? I'll read for another hour. Then I'll think. Thinking requires solitude and silence, both of which I have in abundance at night. I went upstairs, but like the previous night, sleep came slowly. Too many pieces, too many questions. Who switched the watches? Why were both watches broken at the same time? What made one of them valuable enough to kill for? And most importantly, was Gerard Fleming our killer? Or were we being cleverly misdirected while the real murderer watched and waited? I was still pondering those questions when my alarm went off at 1:45 a.m. I dressed, went downstairs, and relieved Saul. He headed home with instructions to return at 8 a.m. to help with the day's investigations. I settled into the chair by the window with Caesar beside me. The street was empty except for an occasional taxi and one drunk who weaved his way east toward 10th Avenue. The brownstone was silent except for the grandfather clock in the hall, ticking steadily toward dawn. At some point I must have dozed, because I woke suddenly at 4:15 with Caesar's low growl rumbling beside me. He was staring at the front windows, his body tense. "What is it, boy?" He growled again, quieter but more intense. I moved to the window and looked out carefully. A figure stood across the street in the shadows between streetlights, watching the brownstone. From this distance I couldn't see features, but the posture suggested someone waiting, watching, planning. I watched the figure for several minutes. It didn't move, didn't approach, just watched. Then, as dawn started breaking in the east, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. Caesar relaxed slightly, but remained alert. I made a note of the time and description, or lack of description, for Wolfe. Someone was definitely interested in this brownstone and what it contained. The question was, would they try to get in? Or would they wait for us to come out? Friday morning arrived with grey skies threatening rain. I was at my desk by 7:30, typing up my notes about the mysterious watcher from 4:15 a.m. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 9, precisely, settled into his chair, and listened to my report about the figure across the street. Description, he asked. Average height, dark coat, hat pulled low. Could have been anyone. They watched for maybe 10 minutes, then left when dawn started breaking. They were assessing our defenses, determining if entry would be feasible. He poured beer. His morning routine included beer with breakfast, a habit that would horrify most doctors. Did they approach? No, just watched and left. Then they concluded entry was too risky. Good, that means our fortifications are effective. He drank. Today you'll take both watches to Dr. Caldwell. Impress upon him the urgency. We need results quickly. Then meet Leonard at the workshop and examine Fleming's history with Julian. I want documentation of every piece Fleming brought for authentication, every interaction, every transaction. You're certain Fleming is our killer? I'm certain Fleming is involved. Whether as killer, accomplice, or catalyst remains to be determined. But his lie about authenticating a watch, combined with his afternoon visit to Helena's building, suggests guilty knowledge. People with guilty knowledge make mistakes. We'll exploit those mistakes. I collected both watches from the safe, still in their velvet pouch, and headed out. Caesar accompanied me again, apparently having appointed himself my bodyguard. We caught a cab to the Rutherford Museum, arriving at 9:45. Dr. Caldwell was in his office, surrounded by even more books and papers than yesterday. He looked up when I entered, saw the velvet pouch, and his eyes lit up with scholarly enthusiasm. Mr. Goodwin, you brought the watches? I extracted both pieces and laid them on his desk. 2 Patek Philippe pocket watches from 1885, both broken, both stopped at 10:47, both nearly identical, but with different serial numbers. I need to know everything about them, history, provenance, value, any special significance, and I need it fast. Caldwell picked up the first watch, the one from Hackett, and examined it through his magnifying glass. He studied the case, the dial, the movement, making small satisfied sounds as he discovered details. Excellent craftsmanship. The engraving is particularly fine. See these vine patterns? That's the work of Heinrich Müller, a Swiss engraver who worked for Patek Philippe in the 1880s. Very distinctive style. He set it down and picked up the second watch, the one from the workshop safe. This one also shows quality work, but the engraving is different. Similar motif but different execution. Possibly a different engraver.
Can you research their backgrounds?
Give me 3 hours. I'll check our database. Contact the Patek Philippe archives in Geneva. They keep records of significant pieces and review auction house catalogues. If these watches have interesting provenance, I'll find it. 3 hours. I'll be back at 1 o'clock. I left the watches with Caldwell and headed to West 46th Street. Leonard Watts was waiting outside the building, looking tired and worried. Caesar studied him with professional interest, accepted his presence, and we took the elevator up to the 4th floor. The workshop looked the same as my previous visit, the bloodstain still dark on the floor, the tools still in their precise positions. Leonard moved through the space with the careful movements of someone navigating a graveyard. The files are in these cabinets, he said, gesturing to a row of filing cabinets against the wall. Julian organized them alphabetically by client name. Everything Fleming brought us would be under F. We pulled out the Fleming folder. It was thick, probably 50 pages of documentation spanning back 8 years. I spread the papers across one of the workbenches and started reading. Gerard Fleming had brought Julian dozens of pieces over the years. Pocket watches, pendant watches, occasional clocks, even some antique chronometers. Julian's notes were meticulous, documenting every piece, every assessment, every conclusion. Most of the pieces were authentic but unremarkable. A few were forgeries that Julian had exposed. The most recent entry was from 8 months ago, a Victorian pendant watch that proved to be genuine, but less valuable than Fleming had claimed. But then I found something interesting, a note paper clipped to a file from 2 years ago. Julian's handwriting. Fleming brought 3 Patek Philippe pocket watches today, claims they're from an estate sale in Philadelphia. Wants authentication before auction. 2 pieces are standard 1880s examples, good condition but unremarkable. Third piece, serial 9447, shows signs of having unusual provenance. Internal markings suggest special commission. Told Fleming I need 2 weeks to research fully. He seemed agitated, wanted faster turnaround, refused to rush the work. I showed the note to Leonard. "Do you remember this?" He read it and nodded slowly. "I remember. Fleming was very pushy about those watches. He wanted Julian to authenticate them immediately so he could list them for auction. Julian refused, said proper authentication takes time. Fleming eventually agreed to wait, but he wasn't happy about it." "What happened with the authentication?" Leonard flipped through more papers. "Here's Julian's final report. 2 watches authenticated as standard pieces, valued at 5,000 to 6,000 each. Third watch, serial 91447, authenticated as part of a special commission from 1885, significantly more valuable. Julian valued it at 25,000 to 30,000. I felt the pieces clicking together. Did Fleming sell that watch? I don't know. Julian's report ends there. His job was authentication, not tracking subsequent sales. Could Fleming have sold it and then later substituted a less valuable watch, planning to sell the original twice, once to an unknowing buyer and once to another collector? Leonard's eyes widened. That's fraud. Serious fraud. And if Julian discovered Fleming had made the substitution, Fleming would need to silence him. I photographed every page in the Fleming file, including Julian's notes about serial 91447. Then I checked the other files, looking for any mention of that specific serial number. I found it in Desmond Hackett's file. 3 months ago, Hackett had purchased a Patek Philippe pocket watch, serial 91447, from a private sale. He'd brought it to Julian for routine maintenance. Julian's notes were brief. Recognized this piece immediately. Same watch I authenticated for Fleming 2 years ago. Informed Hackett of its special provenance and exceptional value. Performed routine cleaning and regulation. Noted mechanism was recently serviced, possibly by another watchmaker before Hackett's purchase. Leonard, did Julian tell you about this? He read the note. No, but Julian didn't always share every detail with me. If it was routine maintenance, he might not have mentioned it. He paused, thinking. But if Julian recognized this as the same watch he'd authenticated for Fleming 2 years ago, and Hackett now owned it through a private sale, Julian would have wondered about the chain of ownership, especially if Fleming had sold it once at auction and then somehow acquired it again to sell privately to Hackett. That would be complicated. That would be fraud. I checked my watch, 12:30. I need to get back to the museum. Leonard, don't discuss this with anyone. If Fleming contacts you, be polite but reveal nothing. Understood? Understood. Mr. Goodwin, do you think Fleming killed Julian? I think Fleming had motive and opportunity. Whether he actually did it is what we're determining. I left Leonard in the workshop and headed back to the Rutherford Museum with Caesar. Dr. Caldwell was waiting in his office, surrounded by papers and looking excited. Mr. Goodwin, I've found it. The provenance. It's extraordinary. I sat down. Tell me. He picked up the watch from Hackett, the one with vine engravings. This piece was part of a special commission in A New York banking consortium commissioned 12 matched Patek Philippe pocket watches as gifts for foreign dignitaries visiting for trade negotiations. Each watch was identical externally, but had unique internal markings identifying the intended recipient. 12 watches. What happened to them? 8 were presented as intended. 4 were never delivered. The trade negotiations collapsed. Those 4 watches returned to the consortium members. Over the decades, they've occasionally appeared in estate sales and auctions. Because of their historical significance and documented provenance, they command premium prices, $25,000 to $35,000 each. And this watch is one of those 4? According to the serial number and internal markings, yes. Specifically, it was intended for a Russian trade minister who never arrived. It remained in the collection of the consortium chairman, a banker named Thurston Reed, until his death in 1950. His estate was liquidated at auction in 1950, so this watch has been in circulation for about 2 years since the estate sale. Correct. The Patek Philippe archives confirmed the serial number matches their records for the special commission. This watch is genuine, historically significant, and extremely valuable. What about the second watch? I gestured at the one from the workshop safe. Caldwell had examined it as well. This is also a genuine 1885 Patek Philippe. Good condition, fine craftsmanship, but it's not part of the special commission. No internal markings, no documented provenance beyond standard manufacture. It's worth 5 to 8,000. A nice piece, but not exceptional. So there it was. One extremely valuable watch, with special provenance. One standard watch worth far less. Someone had switched them, planning to profit from the difference. Dr. Caldwell, do your records show who purchased the special commission watch at the 1951 estate auction? He consulted his notes. Sold to a dealer named, let me see, Gerard Fleming. He purchased it for $12,000, a good price at the time, before its full historical significance was widely documented. Everything clicked into place. Fleming had purchased the valuable watch in Over the years, he'd researched its provenance, had it authenticated by Julian 2 years ago, and sold it at auction for a significant profit. But then he'd somehow acquired a similar watch, the less valuable piece, and used it to perpetrate a fraud. The question was, what was the fraud exactly? And how did Hackett end up with the valuable watch? I thanked Dr. Caldwell, collected both watches, and headed back to West 35th Street. The rain had started, a cold October drizzle that matched my mood. Caesar didn't mind. He trotted beside me with his ears up, watching everything. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office with Saul Panzer. They were reviewing something in a file folder. Both looked up when I entered, dripping from the rain. Well, Wolfe said. I gave him the complete report. Fleming purchasing the valuable watch in 1951, having Julian authenticate it 2 years ago. The watch somehow ending up with Hackett, and Julian performing routine maintenance 3 months ago without mentioning to Leonard that he recognized it. Wolfe listened, his eyes closed. When I finished, he nodded slowly. Saul has been investigating Hackett's building. Tell Archie what you found. Saul consulted his notebook. Hackett lives in a Park Avenue building with good security. Doorman, elevator operator, the works. I spoke with the staff using the pretense of investigating a burglary in the neighborhood. According to the doorman, Gerard Fleming visited Hackett's apartment 3 times in the past year, always by appointment. Most recently, 2 weeks ago. Fleming and Hackett know each other, I said. More than that, Wolfe said. They've done business together. Saul also learned that Hackett purchased several valuable timepieces through Fleming's shop over the past 2 years, including, 3 months ago, a Patek Philippe pocket watch from 1885. I saw where this was heading. Fleming sold Hackett the valuable watch. Indeed, but here's where it becomes interesting. Saul also discovered that Fleming's shop has been struggling financially. He's overextended on inventory purchases and needs cash. What better way to raise cash than to sell a valuable watch to Hackett, then steal it back and substitute a less valuable piece, allowing Fleming to sell the original watch again to another buyer. But Julian recognized the watch when Hackett brought it in for maintenance. Exactly. Julian performed the maintenance, noted the watch's special provenance, and returned it to Hackett. At that point, the watch was back in Hackett's possession with fresh documentation from Julian. Everything seemed fine, until Fleming made the switch. Precisely, Fleming needed the valuable watch back to sell it again. He couldn't simply steal it, that would be obvious, but if he could switch it for a similar watch, Hackett wouldn't notice immediately. Eventually, Hackett might discover the switch, but by then Fleming would have sold the original and the proceeds would be untraceable. Saul picked up the narrative, so Fleming arranges to visit Hackett, maybe claiming he has information about the watch's provenance or offering to help with insurance documentation. During the visit, he makes the switch. Hackett doesn't notice because both watches look nearly identical. But Julian Pembroke noticed. I said, how? Wolfe opened his eyes. That's the critical question. How did Julian discover the switch? He'd already returned the watch to Hackett months earlier. What prompted him to suspect a problem? We sat in silence for a moment. Then something clicked in my memory. Wait. Leonard said Julian's notes mentioned the mechanism had been recently serviced by another watchmaker before Hackett brought it in. What if Fleming had the less valuable watch serviced to make sure it would function perfectly when he made the switch? Julian would have noticed the difference in the mechanism. Same external appearance, but different internal work. But Julian performed that maintenance 3 months ago. Wolfe objected. Why wait until now to confront Hackett? Because 3 months ago, Julian didn't know Fleming had made a switch. He just thought another watchmaker had serviced the piece before Hackett purchased it. But then something happened recently that made Julian suspicious. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. Friday. Hackett picked up the watch after Julian's recent repairs, replacing the worn mainspring and adjusting the escapement. Julian had the watch apart, examining every detail of its mechanism, and he noticed something that wasn't in his original documentation from 3 months earlier. The internal markings, I said. The special commission watches had unique internal markings. 3 months ago, Julian documented those markings, but when he opened the watch Friday to repair it, the markings were different or missing. Precisely. At that moment, Julian realized someone had switched the watches, but he needed to verify his suspicion. He let Hackett take the watch home Friday, then spent the weekend reviewing his documentation and comparing notes. By Sunday evening he was certain. He called Hackett, claimed he'd discovered a problem, asked Hackett to bring the watch back immediately. Hackett came to the workshop at 10 Sunday night. I continued. Brought the watch, which by then was the substituted, less valuable piece. Julian examined it, confirmed the switch, and told Hackett, what? That someone had defrauded him? No, Wolfe said quietly. Julian wouldn't have told Hackett immediately. He would have kept the watch to verify his findings, planned to present the evidence Monday morning, but he made one mistake. He didn't know Fleming was watching, or Fleming had already guessed that Julian might discover the switch. When Hackett left the workshop Sunday night, Fleming followed him, or was already watching the building. Fleming knew Julian had the switched watch and would expose the fraud Monday morning, so Fleming returned to the workshop after Hackett left. Saul nodded grimly. The doorman said he didn't see anyone else enter the building Sunday night. But there are always ways into buildings if you know them. Service entrances, basement access, unlocked windows. Fleming is a regular in that building. He'd know the vulnerabilities. Fleming entered the workshop. Wolfe continued, confronted Julian, demanded the watch. Julian refused. They argued. Perhaps Fleming tried to take the watch by force. In the struggle, both men fell. Julian struck his head on the workbench. And Fleming panicked. I said, he'd killed someone. He couldn't take the watch. That would be obvious evidence of robbery. So he staged it as an accident, left the watch in the safe and fled. But both watches were broken, Saul pointed out. Both stopped at 10:47. How do you explain that? Wolfe was silent for a long moment. Then, there's only one explanation. Fleming brought the original valuable watch with him to the workshop Sunday night. He planned to switch it back, take the less valuable watch Julian had examined, leave the valuable watch in its place. That way, even if the switch was discovered, it would appear the valuable watch had been in Hackett's possession all along. But the struggle happened before he could complete the switch. I said, both watches fell during the fight. Both struck the floor or workbench at the same moment, 10:47. Both crystals cracked, both mechanisms stopped. And in his panic after killing Julian, Fleming grabbed the wrong watch. Wolfe concluded. He'd brought the valuable original intending to make the switch. After Julian died, he grabbed what he thought was the less valuable substitution, the one that could connect him to the fraud, and fled. But in his haste and panic, he took the valuable watch instead, leaving the less valuable piece in the safe. Which means Fleming now has the $30,000 watch and thinks he has the $8,000 watch, Saul said. While we have the $8,000 watch and he thinks we have the $30,000 watch. Exactly. That's why he broke into Hackett's apartment, searching for it. That's why he went to Helena's building looking for it. He's desperate to find the valuable watch, the one he thinks someone else has, not realizing he's already holding it. I looked at the two watches on Wolfe's desk. So which is which? Which one did Helena find in the safe, and which one did she get from Hackett? Wolfe picked up both watches and examined them again with his magnifying glass. After a moment, he pointed at the one with vine and flower engraving. This is the valuable watch with the special provenance, the one Dr. Caldwell authenticated. This is the watch Helena received from Hackett Monday, which means the watch Helena found in the workshop safe Tuesday is the less valuable substitution, I said. The one Fleming meant to take but left behind in his panic. Correct. And Fleming has been searching desperately for the valuable watch ever since, not realizing Helena already gave it to Hackett on Monday, who gave it to us. So what's our move? Saul asked. Wolfe's expression was grim. We need proof. Testimony and circumstantial evidence aren't sufficient for a murder conviction. We need Fleming to incriminate himself. How do we do that? By giving him what he wants. Archie, telephone Gerard Fleming. Tell him you're calling on behalf of Helena Pembroke. She's willing to meet with him about the watch her husband was authenticating. Arrange the meeting for tonight, 8 o'clock, here in this office. You're inviting a murderer into the brownstone? I'm inviting a suspect into a controlled environment, where we have every advantage. The bulletproof glass, the secure doors, the dogs, Saul's presence, your presence, Fritz's vigilance. Fleming will be surrounded and outnumbered, and if my analysis is correct, his desperation will lead him to reveal the truth. And if your analysis is wrong, then we'll have wasted an evening and gained nothing. But I don't believe I'm wrong. Gerard Fleming killed Julian Pembroke, and tonight he'll prove it himself. I looked at Saul, who shrugged. It's risky, but I've seen Wolfe pull off riskier. Fine. I picked up the telephone and dialed Fleming's shop. A woman answered, secretary or assistant. Gerard Fleming, please. This is Archie Goodwin calling. A moment later, Fleming's smooth voice came on the line. Mr. Goodwin, how unexpected. What can I do for you? I'm calling on behalf of Helena Pembroke. She received your note about wanting to discuss a watch her husband was authenticating for you. She's willing to meet with you to discuss it. Excellent. Where and when? Tonight, 8 o'clock, at Nero Wolfe's office, 918 West 35th Street. Mrs. Pembroke will be here, as will Mr. Wolfe and myself. We can discuss the watch and clear up any confusion. A pause. Fleming was thinking, calculating. Why at Wolfe's office? Because Mrs. Pembroke is concerned for her safety. She prefers a neutral location with witnesses present. I see. Very well. 8 o'clock, I'll be there. He hung up. I looked at Wolfe. He's coming. Of course he is. He's desperate, and desperate men make fatal mistakes. Wolfe glanced at the clock. 3:15. We have less than 5 hours to prepare. Saul, you'll position yourself in the front room with a view of both the entrance and this office. Archie, you'll review the documentation one more time. I want every detail memorized. Tonight, when Fleming arrives, we'll give him enough rope to hang himself. And if he becomes violent? I asked. Then Caesar and Mars will remind him that violence in this brownstone has consequences. Wolfe looked at the two Dobermans, who'd been listening to our conversation with alert interest. Tonight, gentlemen, we catch a killer. Caesar thumped his tail once, as if he understood and approved. The game was afoot. At 7:45, the brownstone was ready. Saul was in the front room with Mars and Apollo, positioned where he could see both the street and the office doorway. Fritz was in the kitchen with Loyal, prepared to respond if needed. Minerva and Diana were in the office with Wolfe and me. Caesar was at his usual post near the door. But tonight there was a different quality to his alertness. He seemed to sense we were expecting trouble. Helena Pembroke sat in one of the yellow chairs facing Wolfe's desk. She looked nervous but determined. Are you certain this is necessary? What if Fleming becomes dangerous? Mrs. Pembroke, Wolfe said calmly. This room contains 2 armed men, 6 trained dogs, bulletproof windows, and reinforced doors. Mr. Fleming will be outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The only danger is to his freedom, not to us. Both watches lay on Wolfe's desk, the valuable original, with its special provenance, and the less valuable substitution Fleming had left in the workshop safe. In the desk drawer, accessible but hidden, I had my gun. Saul was similarly armed in the front room. At precisely 8 o'clock, the buzzer sounded. Through the one-way mirror, I watched Fritz check the door, then admit Gerard Fleming. The dogs in the front room rose immediately, Mars and Apollo forming a barrier between Fleming and the rest of the brownstone. Fleming noticed and stopped. Impressive security, he said to Fritz. Mr. Wolfe values his privacy and safety, Fritz replied. This way, please. Fleming entered the office with the confident stride of someone who'd decided his best defense was bold offense. He wore an expensive overcoat and carried a leather briefcase. His eyes moved quickly, assessing the room, the dogs, the people, the exits. The smart man evaluating a potentially dangerous situation. He saw Helena and nodded. Mrs. Pembroke, thank you for agreeing to see me. I'm sorry for your loss. Julian was a remarkable craftsman. Sit down, Mr. Fleming, Wolfe said without preamble. We have matters to discuss. Fleming took the red leather chair. Minerva and Diana moved closer, flanking him. He glanced at them warily, but maintained his composure. I appreciate you arranging this meeting, Mr. Wolfe. As I mentioned in my note to Mrs. Pembroke, I need to discuss a watch Julian was authenticating for me. It's rather urgent. Urgent how? I have a buyer waiting. The authentication was supposed to be completed before Julian's accident. I need the documentation to complete the sale. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Describe this watch you brought to Julian Pembroke for authentication. A Patek Philippe pocket watch, 1885, gold case, white enamel dial, beautiful piece. I acquired it from an estate sale and wanted Julian's expert opinion before offering it to my client. And when did you bring this watch to Julian? About 3 weeks ago. Mr. Fleming, you're lying. The words hung in the air. Fleming's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands tighten slightly on his briefcase. I beg your pardon. You're lying. Leonard Watts maintains Julian Pembroke's client files meticulously. According to those files, you haven't brought any pieces to Pembroke for authentication in over 8 months. There is no record of any Patek Philippe watch from 3 weeks ago. Perhaps Julian hadn't filed the paperwork yet. He was old-fashioned about documentation. Sometimes it took him weeks to catch up. Julian Pembroke documented every piece the day he received it. That was his method, his discipline. There is no documentation of the watch you describe, because you never brought such a watch for authentication. Wolfe paused. So let's discuss the truth instead of this fabrication. Fleming's charming smile had vanished. I don't know what you're talking about. Then let me explain. Wolfe picked up the valuable watch, the one with vine and flower engraving. This is a Patek Philippe pocket watch from 1885, part of a special commission of 12 watches created for foreign dignitaries. It has exceptional provenance and is worth approximately $30,000. Do you recognize it? Fleming's eyes fixed on the watch. I saw the recognition, the desire, and underneath it all, the fear. It's a beautiful piece, but I don't... You purchased this watch in 1951 at the Thurston Reed estate auction for $12,000. 2 years ago, you brought it to Julian Pembroke for authentication. He documented its special provenance and verified its exceptional value. You then sold this watch at auction for approximately $28,000, profiting handsomely. If I sold it at auction, then I no longer own it. Why are we discussing it? Because 6 months ago, you purchased this watch again through a private transaction, or more accurately, you stole it from the buyer to whom you'd originally sold it. Then you sold it again, this time to Desmond Hackett, for $30,000. Fleming stood abruptly. Caesar rose with him, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Fleming sat back down slowly. These accusations are absurd. I've done nothing illegal. Sit down, Mr. Fleming. We're not finished. Wolfe picked up the second watch, the less valuable piece. This is also a Patek Philippe from 1885, superficially similar to the first watch but without special provenance. It's worth approximately $8,000. 3 months ago, you substituted this watch for the valuable watch in Desmond Hackett's collection. Your plan was simple: let Hackett keep this less valuable piece, believing it was the $30,000 watch he'd purchased from you. Meanwhile, you'd sell the original watch again to another collector, profiting twice from the same piece. This is fantasy, pure speculation. It would be speculation, except for one problem. Julian Pembroke discovered your fraud. 3 months ago, Hackett brought the watch, your substitution, to Julian for routine maintenance. Julian noticed discrepancies, but didn't immediately realize what they meant. Then 2 weeks ago, Hackett brought the watch back for repairs. This time, Julian opened the mechanism completely, replacing the mainspring and adjusting the escapement. He examined every internal detail, including the special markings that identify the provenance of commission pieces. The markings were wrong or missing entirely. Julian realized someone had switched the watches. Fleming's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. Even if that were true, it doesn't concern Julian's death. The police ruled it an accident. The police didn't know about the switched watches, but we do, and we know what happened Sunday night. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Friday afternoon, Hackett picked up his repaired watch from Julian's workshop. Julian had discovered the switch but didn't tell Hackett immediately. He needed to verify his findings. Over the weekend, Julian reviewed his documentation, compared his original authentication notes with his recent repair notes, and confirmed his suspicions. Sunday evening at 9:30, he telephoned Hackett, claimed he'd discovered a problem with the watch, and asked Hackett to bring it to the workshop immediately. So Hackett came to the workshop at 10 o'clock Sunday night. He brought the watch, the substitution you'd planted. Julian examined it and confirmed what he suspected. Someone had switched the valuable original for a less valuable substitute. He told Hackett to leave the watch overnight while Julian prepared his documentation. Hackett went home. Julian was alone in the workshop with evidence of your fraud. Still speculation. Not speculation, fact. Wolfe's voice was hard now, relentless. You knew Julian had discovered the switch. Perhaps you'd been watching the workshop, waiting to see if Hackett would notice. Or perhaps you followed Hackett Sunday evening and saw him take a watch to the workshop. Either way, you knew Julian would expose your fraud Monday morning. You couldn't allow that, so you returned to the workshop Sunday night after Hackett left. I was nowhere near that workshop Sunday night. You entered through a service entrance or basement access. The building has several vulnerabilities. You went to the workshop. You confronted Julian. You demanded the watch, the substitution that could connect you to the fraud. Julian refused. You argued. There was a physical struggle. Both of you fell. Julian struck his head on the corner of the workbench. He died. Fleming's hands were gripping the arms of the chair now, his knuckles white. You have no proof of any of this. I have these. Wolfe gestured at the two watches. Both broken, both stopped at 10:47. The exact moment of Julian's death. Both watches were involved in the struggle that killed him. You'd brought the valuable original with you that night, planning to switch it back into Hackett's possession, leaving the less valuable piece in the workshop where Julian's documentation could explain its presence. But the struggle prevented you from completing the switch. Both watches fell, both broke, and in your panic after killing Julian, you grabbed the wrong watch. You took the valuable original, the very watch you'd been trying to recover, and left the less valuable substitution in the workshop safe. This is insane. Is it? Then explain why you broke into Desmond Hackett's apartment Thursday afternoon. The doorman reported a break-in where nothing was stolen except someone had thoroughly searched Hackett's watch collection. You were looking for the valuable watch, the one you think is still missing, but you didn't find it because Helena Pembroke had already collected it from Hackett Monday, following your urgent request to Leonard Watts. I never. And explain why you visited Helena Pembroke's building Thursday afternoon with a fabricated story about authenticating a watch for Julian. You were trying to locate the valuable watch, the one you believe Helena has. But she doesn't have it. We have it. Wolfe picked up the valuable watch again. This is the watch you killed Julian Pembroke to recover. And you failed. It's here, in my office, with documentation of its provenance and its role in your fraud. Fleming stood again, his face flushed with anger. You can't prove any of this. It's all theory, all speculation. You have no witnesses, no physical evidence connecting me to that workshop Sunday night. The police investigated and concluded it was an accident. You have nothing. On the contrary, Mr. Fleming, we have everything. Wolfe's voice was cold. We have the watches. We have Julian's documentation showing you authenticated the valuable watch 2 years ago. We have Desmond Hackett's testimony that you sold him this watch 6 months ago. We have Leonard Watts's files showing no recent business between you and Julian. We have Dr. Emerson Caldwell's provenance research confirming the special value of the original watch. And we have your own actions, the lies, the break-in, the desperate searching, proving your guilty knowledge. None of that proves I killed Julian Pembroke. Perhaps not individually, but collectively, presented to a jury, it establishes motive, opportunity, and consciousness of guilt. Combined with forensic evidence from the watches, both broken at the same moment, both involved in the struggle, it will be sufficient for a conviction. Fleming's composure finally cracked. His hand moved toward his briefcase. Caesar exploded into motion, covering the 6 feet between his position and Fleming's chair in less than a second. His teeth were bared, a growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Fleming froze. I wouldn't, I said quietly, my hand inside my jacket near my gun. In the front room, I heard Saul moving closer. Caesar doesn't like sudden movements, and neither do I. Fleming's hand retreated slowly from the briefcase. Caesar maintained his position, blocking any escape route. Mr. Fleming, Wolfe said with terrible calm, you have 2 choices. You can continue lying, forcing us to present this evidence to the police and the district attorney. The resulting trial will be public, humiliating, and will end with your conviction for fraud and second-degree murder, 20 years to life in prison. Or you can tell us the truth now, demonstrate that Julian's death was unintentional, and perhaps convince the district attorney to accept a manslaughter plea, 10 to 15 years. Fleming looked around the room at Wolfe, at me, at Helena, at the 6 dogs surrounding him, at the bulletproof windows and reinforced doors. His shoulders sagged. "It was an accident," he said quietly. "I never meant to kill him. Tell us what happened." Fleming sat back down, defeated. Caesar remained close, watching him with unblinking intensity. "Everything you said is true. I did switch the watches, substituted the less valuable piece for the original. I needed money. My shop was failing. I'd overextended buying inventory at auctions. The only way to raise cash quickly was to sell the original watch again. I thought Hackett would never notice. He's wealthy, has dozens of watches, pays more attention to provenance documentation than to the actual pieces. But Julian noticed. Sunday night, Hackett called me. He was upset. He said Julian had discovered a problem with the watch and wanted to examine it again immediately. I knew what that meant. Julian had figured out the switch. I panicked. If Julian exposed the fraud, I'd lose everything. My shop, my reputation, probably face criminal charges. I couldn't let that happen. So you went to the workshop. I waited across the street until Hackett left. Then I went to the building. I've been there dozens of times over the years. I know the superintendent. I know which basement door is usually unlocked. I went up to Julian's workshop. I tried to convince him to stay quiet, to give me time to fix the situation. He refused. He said what I'd done was fraud, that Hackett deserved to know the truth, that he couldn't be complicit in deceiving a client. What happened then? I got angry. I told him I'd ruin him professionally, spread rumors about his authentication accuracy. He just looked at me with contempt and turned away. I grabbed his arm, trying to make him listen. He pulled away. We struggled. I was holding both watches. I'd brought the original to switch back, trying to undo the fraud. The watches fell, crashed on the workbench. We both reached for them. Julian slipped, fell backward. His head hit the corner of the bench. There was blood, so much blood. I tried to help him, but he wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. I panicked. I grabbed one of the watches. I thought I grabbed the substitution, the one that would incriminate me. I ran. But you grabbed the wrong watch. I didn't realize it until Monday. I opened my briefcase and saw the original, the valuable watch I'd been trying to recover. The substitution was still in Julian's workshop. I'd fled with the very evidence I was trying to hide. That's when I started searching for it. I broke into Hackett's apartment, thinking maybe he'd picked it up. I went to Helena's building, trying to find out if she had it. But you had it all along. Yes, Wolfe said. We had it all along. And now you've confessed to fraud, manslaughter, breaking and entering, and obstruction of justice. He looked at me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we have Julian Pembroke's killer, and he'll want to hear the confession. Fleming slumped in the chair, all fight gone. Caesar relaxed slightly but maintained his guard position. I went to the telephone and dialed Kramer's direct line at the precinct. Kramer. Inspector, Archie Goodwin. We have Gerard Fleming here at the brownstone. He's just confessed to killing Julian Pembroke. You'll want to come collect him. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't let him leave. He's not going anywhere. We have 6 dogs who'd be disappointed if he tried. I hung up and returned to my desk. Fleming sat motionless, staring at the 2 watches on Wolfe's desk, the valuable original he'd killed for, and the substitution that had ruined him. Helena Pembroke looked at him with a mix of disgust and pity. You killed my husband for money, for a watch. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was an accident. I never meant... You meant to commit fraud. You meant to steal. The killing might have been unintentional, but everything leading to it was deliberate. Julian died because you valued profit over integrity. She stood. I hope you spend the rest of your life regretting it. She left the office, Fritz escorting her back to the guest room. The rest of us waited in silence. Fleming sat like a condemned man, watching the clock tick toward his execution. Caesar and the other dogs maintained their vigil. Wolfe returned to his book, having apparently decided Fleming was no longer worth his attention. At 8:27, the buzzer sounded. Inspector Kramer arrived with Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins and 2 uniformed officers. The dogs knew Kramer. They'd seen him enough times over the years and greeted him with wagging tails rather than suspicion. He looked at them, looked at Fleming, and shook his head. Goodwin said, "You have a confession?" "We do," Wolfe said. "Mr. Fleming has admitted to switching valuable watches, confronting Julian Pembroke Sunday night. and accidentally killing him during a struggle. He then fled the scene, staged it as an accident, and has been searching for evidence ever since. Kramer looked at Fleming. Is that true? Fleming nodded slowly. It was an accident. I never meant to kill him. Tell it to the district attorney. You're under arrest for the murder of Julian Pembroke, fraud, breaking and entering, and whatever else we can think of. He nodded to the uniformed officers. Take him in. Book him. I'll be there shortly. They handcuffed Fleming and led him out. Caesar watched from the doorway, tail wagging slightly. Another job done, another threat neutralized. Mars and Apollo joined him, the three Dobermans forming an honor guard as the police departed. Kramer lingered, looking at Wolfe with grudging respect. How'd you figure it out? The watches told the story. Both broken at the same moment, both involved in the crime. Once we understood the fraud switching valuable and less valuable pieces, the rest followed logically. The me said it was an accident, head trauma from a fall. It was an accident that occurred during the commission of a felony. That makes it second-degree murder under New York law. Wolfe paused. The district attorney will have no difficulty securing a conviction. We have documentation, witnesses, and Fleming's own confession. Yeah, well, thanks for solving it, even if you did make my detectives look bad. Your detectives saw an elderly man who fell and died. They saw no evidence of robbery, no signs of struggle beyond the fall itself. They reached a reasonable conclusion based on incomplete information. Don't blame them for failing to see what wasn't obvious. Kramer grunted. I suppose. Mrs. Pembroke will be pleased anyway. She gets justice, if not her husband back. After Kramer left, Wolfe poured beer and drank deeply. The tension that had filled the office for the past hour drained away. Even the dogs relaxed, returning to their various resting positions. Well done, Archie. Your investigation was thorough, and your documentation was essential. It was your deduction that put the pieces together. I just collected the facts. Facts without interpretation are merely data. Interpretation without facts is merely fantasy. We needed both. He glanced at the two watches still on his desk. These will be evidence in Fleming's trial. Afterward, the valuable watch will be returned to Desmond Hackett. He purchased it in good faith and deserves to keep it. The less valuable watch will remain in the evidence locker as proof of Fleming's fraud. What about Helena? She's lost her husband and will probably lose the insurance money once the death is ruled murder instead of accident. She has the $20,000 of workshop equipment and client relationships. More importantly, she has justice. Sometimes that's the best we can provide. He closed his eyes. Now go. I'm tired. Tomorrow we'll formalize the documentation for the district attorney. Tonight I'm going to finish my book and then sleep. I stood, stretched, and headed for the stairs. Diana followed me. Apparently she'd decided I needed a companion for the night. At the landing, I looked back. Wolfe was already absorbed in the conquests of Charlemagne, beer at his elbow, the case solved and filed away in his remarkable memory. Another mystery resolved, another killer caught, another day's work for Nero Wolfe. Sometimes I wondered why anyone bothered committing murder in New York. Didn't they know we were watching? Saturday morning arrived with sunshine that felt like the world apologizing for the week's dreariness. I was at my desk by 8:30, typing up the formal report for Inspector Kramer and the district attorney. The documentation needed to be perfect. Dates, times, witness statements, the provenance research from Dr. Caldwell, Leonard Watts's file records, everything that would support Fleming's prosecution. Wolfe descended at 9, settled into his chair, and immediately rang for beer. Fritz appeared with breakfast, shirred eggs, bacon, toast, and a pot of coffee that smelled like heaven had opened a cafe. The dogs were distributed throughout the brownstone, relaxed now that the threat had passed. Caesar was back at his post near the hall, Mars was in the front room, and the others were scattered between the kitchen and office. Helena Pembroke came down at 9:30, looking rested and more composed than she had in days. Diana followed her faithfully. The Doberman had apparently decided Helena needed a permanent guardian. Good morning, she said. I want to thank you both. You gave Julian justice. Wolfe waved a dismissive hand. We performed the work you hired us for. Speaking of which, your check for the balance, $15,000, would be appreciated. She opened her purse and extracted a checkbook. I'm writing it now. Mr. Wolfe, what will happen to Gerard Fleming? He'll be charged with second-degree murder, fraud, and various other crimes. If his attorney is competent, he'll negotiate a plea to manslaughter, 10 to 15 years. If he insists on trial, he'll likely receive 20 to life. The evidence is overwhelming. Good. She signed the check and handed it to me. Julian deserves that much. He was an honest man who died because someone else valued money over integrity. Many people die for that reason, Mrs. Pembroke. It's one of humanity's more persistent failings. Wolfe drank beer. What will you do with your husband's workshop? I'm selling it to Leonard Watts. He's been Julian's assistant for 12 years. He has the skills to continue the business. I'll keep Julian's personal tools and reference books, but everything else goes to Leonard. He'll preserve Julian's reputation and continue serving his clients. A wise decision. Your husband trained him well. After Helena left with Diana escorting her to the door and Fritz ensuring she got safely into her taxi, I finished the report and sent it via messenger to Kramer's office. Then I filed our copies, organized the photographs, and locked everything in the safe. Wolfe was reading when the telephone rang at 11:15. I answered. Nero Wolfe's office. Mr. Goodwin, this is Desmond Hackett. I heard from Inspector Kramer that you've solved Julian's murder. Is it true Gerard Fleming killed him? It's true. Fleming confessed last night. He'll be prosecuted. Good God. I've known Gerard for years, bought dozens of pieces through him. I had no idea he trailed off. Inspector Kramer said something about switched watches. My Patek Philippe. Yes, Fleming sold you the valuable original 6 months ago, then later substituted a less valuable watch, planning to sell the original again. Julian discovered the fraud and was killed when Fleming tried to recover the evidence. So the watch I have now, which one is it? You have the valuable original. It's currently in our safe as evidence, but it will be returned to you after Fleming's trial. You purchased it legitimately, you own it, and its value hasn't diminished. Thank God. I paid $30,000 for that watch. If it was a fraud, he sighed with relief. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin, and thank Mr. Wolfe. Julian was a good man. He deserved better than to die over a timepiece. He did, but at least his killer will face justice. After I hung up, Wolfe looked at me. Satisfied? Mostly. Fleming's in custody. Helena has answers. Hackett gets his valuable watch back. The only loose end is whether Fleming will plead guilty or force a trial. He'll plead. His attorney will explain that a confession witnessed by 4 people, 2 trained investigators, and 6 dogs is not defensible at trial. He'll take the manslaughter plea and hope for parole in 10 years. And the insurance company? Helena mentioned they'd fight her claim if Julian's death was murder instead of accident. That's their prerogative. But the facts support accident. Fleming didn't intend to kill Pembroke. The death occurred during a struggle over property. A competent attorney can argue that falls within accidental death clauses. Helena will probably receive her settlement, though it may take time. The telephone rang again. This time it was Lieutenant Brodie from the precinct. Goodwin, Brodie here. I owe you and Wolfe an apology. I called the Pembroke death an accident. I was wrong. You were working with incomplete information, Lieutenant. Once we discovered the fraud and the switched watches, everything else followed. Yeah, well, I should have looked harder. The widow said it was murder. I should have listened. He paused. Fleming's attorney is already talking plea bargain. Looks like we'll close this as manslaughter. Good work. Thank you, Lieutenant. I hung up and reported the conversation to Wolfe. He nodded with satisfaction, finished his beer and stood. I'm going to the plant rooms. Theodore needs help with the phalaenopsis. If anyone calls, take a message. He headed for the elevator, leaving me alone in the office with Caesar, who'd opened one eye when Wolfe moved but otherwise hadn't stirred. I leaned back in my chair, propped my feet on the desk, and thought about the case. Julian Pembroke had been a meticulous craftsman who valued honesty and integrity. He'd discovered a fraud, confronted the perpetrator, and died defending his principles. Gerard Fleming had been an ambitious dealer who valued profit over ethics. He'd committed fraud, killed to cover it up, and now faced decades in prison. The watches that had started everything, one valuable, one ordinary, sat in our safe waiting to be entered as evidence. 2 nearly identical timepieces that had cost one man his life and another man his freedom. There's a lesson there somewhere about greed and consequences, but I'll leave that to philosophers. I'm just a detective who helps Nero Wolfe solve murders, and occasionally prevents killers from breaking into fortified brownstones. Speaking of which, I made a mental note to have Fritz check all the locks and to remind the dogs to stay vigilant. We'd caught this killer, but there would be others. There always were in New York City. The phone rang again. I sighed and picked it up. Nero Wolfe's office. Mr. Goodwin, this is Dr. Caldwell from the Rutherford Museum. I wanted to follow up on the watches you brought me. I've completed my research and have additional information if you're interested. The case is solved, Dr. Caldwell. Gerard Fleming confessed to killing Julian Pembroke. Oh, well that's good, I suppose. Justice served and all that. But I did discover something fascinating about those watches. The special commission I mentioned, the 12 watches for foreign dignitaries. Turns out there were actually 14 watches created, not 12. 2 extras were made as replacements, in case any of the originals were damaged or lost before the presentation ceremony. Those 2 extras have never been fully documented. They might be worth even more than the standard commission pieces, because of their rarity. That's interesting, Dr. Caldwell. But since the case is closed, I don't think it matters much now. Of course. But if you ever need horological expertise again, please don't hesitate to call. This has been the most exciting week I've had in years. I thanked him and hung up. 14 watches, instead of 12. 2 undocumented extras. I made a note in the file, then decided it wasn't relevant and crossed it out. The case was closed. Fleming had confessed. The district attorney was building his prosecution. Helena had her justice. Hackett would get his valuable watch back. Sometimes in this business, that's as close to a happy ending as you get. Caesar thumped his tail twice, his version of agreeing. I scratched his ears and went to the kitchen to see what Fritz was preparing for lunch. Outside the bulletproof windows, West 35th Street continued its Saturday routine. Inside the brownstone, Nero Wolfe was up in the plant rooms with his orchids, far from murderers and fraud and broken watches. Just another week in the life of the greatest detective in New York City. And his assistant, who did all the legwork and most of the talking. But I wouldn't have it any other way.